All right. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 450, Black Health Talk. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. Document description beneath the video for you to follow along with. If you want to engage in discussion, there'll be a link in the chat for you to click on. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you to advance you to the panel. This should not take long. This should be real quick. So racism and its impact on Black health. There's been a lot of discussion about what social impact does racism have on Black people, and the main criteria isn't just about economics anymore. It's not just about politics, but it's more about their physical and mental well-being. And so because of that, wanted to make sure we put some emphasis behind it. And so what we'll do today is we'll go over those couple of articles, and we'll have a discussion, and then we'll wrap up. All right, what is advertisements, man? All right. Let me share my screen. Just make sure that the link is in the chat. Yeah, the link is in the chat. Okay. Let me acknowledge the people that have shown up first. David Moreau, good afternoon. Dee Felder, good afternoon. Reigning Woman, good afternoon to you. And just as an FYI for everyone else, if you are interested in life coaching, Reigning Woman does offer life coaching. Subscribe to Reigning Woman. She is in the chat. Let's help her break 1,000 subscribers this spring. So. All right, let me get started with the article. This one is from AlJazeera.com. Redlining linked to increased asthma ER visits, study says. U.S. people of color are disproportionately affected by asthma. New study looks at how economic policy has contributed. Let me expand this out. The redlining of poor neighborhoods in the 1930s is associated with higher rates of emergency department visits due to asthma among people of color today. A new study of 8 major California cities published in the Lancet Planetary Health Journal has found current rates of emergency room visits due to asthma, a respiratory condition that disproportionately affects people of color in the United States, are around 2.4 times higher in areas that were redlined or deprioritized for mortgage investment in the 1930s, researchers found. It's well documented that asthma rates are higher among people of color, affecting 10.1% of non-Hispanic African Americans versus just 8.1% of white non-Hispanics in 2017, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention. When it comes to asthma-related deaths, the disparity is even starker. African American adults were almost 3 times more likely to die from asthma-related causes than white adults in 2014, according to the U.S. Office for Minority Health, and African American children had a death rate 10 times that of non-Hispanic white children in 2015. So the 8 cities studied here, Fresno, Los Angeles, Oakland, Sacramento, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, and Stockton. 4 grades, A, B, C, and D. And 2.4 times higher rates of emergency department visits related to asthma in redlined, D-graded areas. So D being the highest perceived risk grade. A lack of access to healthcare, along with distress and exposure to air pollution, are all factors that have been studied when it comes to the racial disparity in asthma rates. But what we felt was lacking was historical view that considered why these factors were concentrated in certain neighborhoods more than others, said the study's lead author, Anthony Nardone, a medical student and researcher at the University of California, Berkeley University of California, San Francisco Joint Medical Program. The observational study conducted by researchers at UC Berkeley, UCSF, and Columbia University in New York City looked at Great Depression era maps created by the homeowners loan corporation for 8 California cities: Fresno, Los Angeles, Oakland, Sacramento, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, and Stockton. The map graded urban neighborhoods by the perceived risk of mortgage default from A to D, with D representing the highest risk. Areas that were predominantly inner city with Black and immigrant residents were systematically graded as hazardous for investment and outlined in red or redlined. Redlining propelled a lack of investment in those areas perceived as higher risk, the study authors explained. The proportion of the population that was non-Hispanic, Black, and Hispanic, the percentage of the population living in poverty, in diesel exhaust particle emissions all significantly increased as security map risk grade worsened, the study found. Currently, asthma prevalence by race, Black people 10.1%, white people 8.1%, other people 6.7%, and Hispanic people 6.4%. Every 90 days later, those homeowners loan corporation categorizations seem to still have an effect. The study shows in issues around poverty and neighborhood characteristics really do play an important role in people's health, said study co-author Neetha Thakur, medical doctor, a pulmonary and critical care physician at UCSF. Redlining to these neighborhoods, coupled with the other racist policies at the time, led to divestment of these neighborhoods. Thakur told Al Jazeera. Now it's resulting in redline neighborhoods being closer to freeways, not having as many resources present in the community, and also decreasing their access to healthcare services. Living close to a freeway is associated with uncontrolled asthma in children. A 2010 study published in the Journal of Allergy found with some patients experiencing a 2-fold increase in risk for uncontrolled asthma if they live less than 2 miles from a freeway. The decisions that were made around where to build highways in the 40s and 50s were likely correspond to where neighborhoods were essentially just considered less valuable and where people had less autonomy and advocacy for their needs, Nardone said. And we know ambient air pollution is pretty strongly tied to asthma. What we know about wealth is that it acts as a buffer. It helps people buffer stress. It helps people live in places that might not have exposure to air pollution. Nardone added. Farquhar and Nardone said they hope to look at the bigger picture and see if the association between redlining and asthma rates hold a national level as well. So this is very interesting. Everybody I know who's melanated tends to have some form of asthma, whether they have a prescription, medical prescription or not. They seem to have it. Short of breath, overweight, not really capable of having stamina. A lot of wheezing and things like that when they just sitting, they're wheezing. So a lot of respiratory issues do come from that. And the food desert part, right? So the gaps in between how Black people have access to food, these big supermarkets and whatnot. They have to travel a considerable distance to get to a credible supermarket chain. And because of that, the trucks actually pass through there, but they don't actually, the fumes and the exhaust fumes and whatnot that come from that actually pollute that area and keep going until it reaches its destination. And there's nothing that you can actually do about that. Now, some of the things that we have seen here locally is actually increasing the vegetation in the area actually helps alleviate that and the climate change that does impact those areas. And so because of that, more flowers, more vegetation actually helps clean the air. But there's a lack of investment in these areas. And so you tend to have a lot of this smelly air. I mean, you have, these dirt bikes and trucks and things like that. These all these guys with these straight, catless exhaust systems running up and down the neighborhoods and stuff like that. All that stuff impacts, people. You can smell it even after the car is left for minutes. You can still smell it. Especially if you have a convoy of vehicles, you smell it. So I think that this is an area that can be actually researched on a national level. You can look at predominantly Black neighborhoods across Chicago, Baltimore, and Philly, and New York, and those places. And you can actually look at this from a technological perspective as a social solution to this. Social justice solution to this would be, or at least not a solution, but a way to actually monitor this. And you can use IoT, Internet of Things. You can use a device to actually calculate the particles in the air and do it in real time, calculate it, and put it inside the cloud, not the actual cloud, but the technological cloud, process all that information with AI in real time and know the time of day that is happening, whether or not school is in play or how many people are actually in the neighborhood and so on and so forth. And you can actually generate reports in real time. And that will give you better statistics and mapping and heat mapping of what's going on and who's going to be totally impacted by this. And thus you'll get results from that. And people can actually see this in real time because it's a public health issue. So the Public Health Commission should actually be driving this initiative, but Black people have to be frontline and center as well, knowledge on this and looking for those results. Especially women who tend to be pregnant tend to inhale a lot of these particles as well, and then pass that on to their fetus. And maybe Dr. Phoenix can probably speak to something like this if he's listening, he ever gets a chance to come up here. I think that this is actually a very interesting way to take information technology and actually align that with public health and data science, because data science is actually going to play a significant role in this.
Hey, Mike, what's good, man?
Hey, nothing much, man. What's going on?
Not much, man. Just listening in.
Yeah, the ability to take a drone with a listening device or some other particle grabbing device and just shoot it right through every single neighborhood, over a course of a day, and just collect all the particles throughout throughout the high traffic time. And I bet you're gonna capture a whole lot of data from that. I bet you're gonna catch a whole lot of data from that. So I think this is a dope article though.
Yeah, don't you think also like in the wearable space, data can be collected through like wearable devices like Fitbits and stuff like that?
Well, that's only going to collect the data on that person, not the environment itself.
Well, what I'm saying is, that could be kind of like part of the data collection, right? The effects on the person. So like you could correlate the data, right? On one end, you have like what you were just talking about, measuring like emissions levels during like maybe like rush hour, for example, right? And then correlate that with, say, like the biometrics of a person during that same time in that same area.
Yeah, any data that's generated is going to be usable.
Yeah.
It has to be applicable to the situation, right? So if a person, I saw a kid this morning, man. I mean, so overweight, man. I mean, he had to be 12, 13 years old, like one of those wooden barrels, man.
Jeez.
It's crazy. I mean, there's no way he would be able. He's at risk at this point. He's at risk.
Yeah, I mean, that's too young to be dealing with like hypertension issues and diabetic issues and heart maladies, and man, that's too young for that shit.
Yeah, well, eating honey buns and stuff like that doesn't help either.
All right. Well, yeah. One other aspect I wanted to throw out there, Mike, get your take on it, is so in these types of situations, what do you think about addressing it from a green transportation perspective, right? So you start to maybe mandate or institute more bike and electric, scooter, electric bike type usage, cargo bikes for delivery vehicles, like last mile delivery, in order to just reduce overall emissions in an area.
So it's not the people that's actually causing this, right? It's the actual.
Are we talking about the infrastructure around us, like buildings?
It's the infrastructure around it that's causing it. So
right, okay.
Access to the poor people, the victims, access to like microtransportation doesn't really solve the issue, right? It's how,
right, like because their communities are put close to like a fucking coal plant or some sort of manufacturing plant that emits a lot of shit, right? That just goes up.
Highway.
Right.
Just highway, right? We had the biggest massive infrastructure project in the country that the country's ever seen, called the Big Dick Project. That thing took 30 years to build. So the amount of trucks that passed through Black neighborhoods when this was going on,
right,
20 or 25 years, it's massive, man. You're talking at least 500 dump trucks a day passing through there on a consistent basis.
Just dumping diesel smoke.
Oh man, it was horrific. It was horrific. They never benefited from the Big Dick Project. So and then you take into consideration all the new infrastructure that has been built for white people in South Boston. Those trucks had to pass through those Black neighborhoods. Meanwhile, they lived in the projects in these dilapidated areas, but the new infrastructure is being built outside of their neighborhoods. And those trucks had
right. It's like and take the pollution too.
Yeah. We got Dr. Phoenix on the panel. What's going on, bro?
There he is.
What's going on, brothers?
What's going on?
I don't know. I got a bit of a sore throat today, so. So yeah, in regards to this, because personally, I had asthma as a child, and and I can remember the number of times I've had to spend overnights in the hospital. I even spent the Christmas in the hospital when I was really young. So I can personally speak to that issue. But as it relates to redlining, I've always known about this through my adult life, but it really didn't come into context of the major implications on health until I was an undergrad and I was in my nursing program. And we had to take a population health sciences course. And in that, we talked about redlining and the effects. And just so in in Wisconsin in particular, in Milwaukee, uh, most Black people are really segregated to the northwest side of the city. And so when we did these courses, they had this big overlay. They had this map showing the various zip codes where Black populations were at. And so they did an overlay of showing how where folks were redlined into these particular zip codes. And then they did the same overlay showing chronic health diseases, so like elevated lead levels in children, respiratory issues, and it was in the exact same area. So the exact same outline that showed where Black folks had been redlined into these particular zip codes also had these clusters of individuals, of people, specifically children, who had these chronic health issues like elevated lead levels, asthma, and just in general. But it's also important to note too that if you look at any Black neighborhood in this country, you pick your city and there's a sizable Black population, the first thing you'll notice, it is usually bisected by a major interstate.
Mhm.
And so when you consider that traffic goes through there, like, again, I grew up in Chicago, and I use where I grew up at because I grew up in a very middle class neighborhood. However, there's the 90 was like literally like 2 blocks from my home. And so when you consider that, you have a major interstate, you have millions and millions of vehicles that go through there every year, and you just think about the trucks, you think about the construction vehicles that you guys were talking about early, and how in general uh, combustion of diesel fuel is one of the dirtiest fuels out there, as everybody knows from the Volkswagen scandal.
Yep.
But but that, considering that and understanding that this is what children are exposed to every single day, and adults, because again, even in these same areas, when you consider that for asthma and for children in asthma particular, in the summertime tends to, as it gets warmer, it tends to exacerbate a lot of those issues.
Yep.
And so when you consider that, and then high rates of smog and pollution from trucks and from vehicles going through there 24/7, that's why you can see where if you were to look at, and this is where public health and population health and genetics, and specifically population health genetics, comes into play. If you start to look at some of the overlays, and you will see clusters in every city of where you have some of the high incidences of children with childhood asthma, children with respiratory issues, bronchitis, children with elevated lead levels, because again, prior to 1980, the number one cause of elevated lead levels in adults in America was
Pipes.
through vehicles.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It was through. What was it through?
It was vehicles. It was actually
Because you're right. You're right about that because they switched in 1974.
The fuel. It was the
Yeah.
fuel because it was leaded fuel back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
Fuel was all leaded,
Right.
but considering that these vehicles were all traveling through cities, through inner cities, through interstates, it got atomized and became aerosol in the air, and so that was the principal way it got into the bloodstream prior to 1980. Now, after that, you also saw the building of a lot of housing projects between that period of
Yep.
the mid 1960s into the 80s. And so they were still, even though lead paints was supposed to have not been used, many of those housing projects were already built before then, and Chicago is infamous for its housing projects, for example.
Yep.
And so the paint on that were lead based, and also the plumbing, the pipes were lead. And so what happens that, and this is particularly true in Wisconsin and Milwaukee in particular, where you still have old pipes that were in the areas that were Black folks were redlining to, all of the pipes there are made from lead. And so children drink from those lead pipes and they get elevated lead levels. They also live in these housing projects where you have a high concentration of roaches,
Yep.
have high concentration of people smoking. The walls are very thin, so smoke goes, smoke rises. So even if you lived at the top levels of these housing projects, children were still being exposed to smoke.
And the
So,
sheetrock as well. Sheetrock was pretty toxic too.
Yeah, we're not even talking just secondhand. We're talking third and fourth hand smoke. Because again, some of the principal byproducts of cigarette smoke is like formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. Benzene, which is also a known carcinogen. I mean, tons of chemicals just within the combustion process of smoking a cigarette alone, which contributes to a lot of the respiratory illnesses that Black children deal with. So.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Everything you said is absolutely true, and all of these things compound and create this sort of massive problem. Plus, at the time, they didn't have all these urgent care facilities or neighborhood clinics at the time. So, if you want, like the headline says right here, red line linked to increased asthma ER visits. Yeah, well, they had to go to the ER. There was no urgent care facilities and stuff like that around.
Right.
Yeah, now, someone in the chat
there was
said,
no urgent care, and
yeah, but this is where your child pulmonologist, so this and your pulmonary critical care docs, so because someone in the chat mentioned asbestos. Yeah, asbestos is a problem, but it's not necessarily a problem that's facing children. It's typically an adult issue because a lot of adults work in jobs, a lot of contracting jobs, specifically folks who were in the Navy and you worked in shipping yards. That was one of the common sources of being exposed to asbestos.
Why in a shipping yard?
Because it's just a lot of chemicals that they were around, a lot of stuff that they dealt with, the containers, all that stuff. It was
okay.
Yeah, a lot of hazardous material and stuff like that. So yeah. So but in terms of just understanding how redlining affects the general health of Black children, this is one of these issues. I come on panels and I talk about this, but truly, if Black folks are going to get a handle on this issue of redlining, there's going to have to be a proportion of us that are involved in healthcare. Certainly folks that are involved in pediatrics, because this is a major problem. Kids miss, the long-term issues of chronic asthma, elevated lead levels. If we're talking like 2 and 3 year olds that are having, I've seen. In fact, I'm working on a research project right now directly related to lead levels in children, because normally I'm in adult medicine, but specifically for this, we're talking like 3 year olds with lead levels of 33, 40, 50. I think the highest I seen was damn near 100. And
how old are they?
We're talking 3, 4 years old. So these is in these critical formative years where the brain is developing.
Yeah.
And CDC guidelines recommend that elevated lead levels are considered elevated if it's over 5 milligrams per deciliter. However, I'm seeing cases of children with, elevated lead levels in the 20s, 30s, 50s. I think the highest I seen was about 80 something. It was pretty close to 100. And this is what we're seeing, and we're understanding that long-term elevated lead levels and long-term exposure to lead causes neurological dysfunction. Again, if we go back to what happened with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, it was said that he had elevated lead. He had been testing high for elevated lead levels since he was a child.
I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask you, how does that affect, behavioral and learning issues?
Well, so typically what that does is that it actually inhibits a lot the neurological function and growth within the brain. So specifically, when you think about the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, where you have executive functioning, And you also have you
Mhm.
have that area where it involves decision making, responses, rational
Logic and
responses.
reason.
Yeah, exactly. Logic, reasoning,
Right.
rational responses to conversation, not saying things that are out of context, stuff like that. That gets in that's where a lot of the damage occurs, is in those areas. So
It was going on just
Going on, brothers. Now, this is a good subject. I'm learning right now. I like
yeah,
this
what's
kind
going
of
on,
talk.
brother?
What's going on, Dr. Phoenix? It's good talk, man. Good information. And it was crazy is last year I did a video but talking more about the economic and social issue revocations of redlining that really started from um, racial covenants. And I did a video on I was breaking down a video showing clips from a video called Jim Crow North, and it talks about Minneapolis specifically and how they started from racial covenants and then it evolved into redlining and how that spread throughout the North through policy, and then also talked about how the World War II veterans came back and fought against it. So a lot of brothers right now who can move and buy houses in certain places is because we killed racial covenants. Redlining still continues. Racial covenants is still actually legal. It just can't be enforced, which is crazy. You can still actually put that into a deed, but you can't enforce it like you could before. What that is basically, even if you was a good, kind-hearted white person, you still couldn't sell to a non-white person. And if you did so, you can lose your property. So that's a heavy, heavy penalty for a working class white person. You know what I mean? So even if you wasn't racist, they still built it into, the system. So you had to be racist. No, you just couldn't sell to a brother or Asian or anyone who wasn't considered white or Aryan. Anyway, and that evolved into
it
something called
used to be
redlining.
like that. Oh no, I was just gonna say it used to be like that in California,
Yeah.
but you've got just way too much more money that's flooded in, where it basically it's a buyer's market, right?
Yeah.
Like it's too much more money for you to try to impose that.
Yeah. That's the money game now. So, but there's still some exclusive neighborhoods in California, like some exclusive Jewish neighborhoods. They don't care how much money you got. They still ain't selling.
It's still some. It's
Yeah, you know
still
what I mean?
some, but it's not. Yeah, it's not like how you was talking. It used to be like that, dude. I
Right. They're
remember,
not gonna lose
but
their
not so
property if
much.
somebody
But yeah, Jews
gets
hold
out of
their shit.
pocket. Right. If somebody gets
They're
off
not. The Jews
code
ain't
and
gonna lose
does it,
their
yeah.
shit.
Right.
No,
Yeah,
and
but that created the ghetto. And when they started doing the redlining, they started creating these ghettos. And then they started what they call public housing. And then, and then they put those public houses in certain areas. And if you look at the maps on this video, it's a very well done documentary called Jim Crow North. If you get a chance to check it out, you should. It's very well done. And it shows you how they put a lot of our black neighborhoods right next to these business districts, industrial districts, where they
yeah,
had back then, they
Yep.
had a lot of the,
Yep.
the
I
manufacturing.
actually had to watch that documentary when I was in undergrad when I took a sociology course.
Oh, good for
And
you.
so I'm very familiar with it because I'm in Wisconsin. So again, you saw similar practices in Milwaukee, certainly in Chicago. Those two cities were very famous for their covenant clause, clauses, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's a
so
very good documentary, man. I didn't know it was going to be that detailed when I watched it.
yeah.
And they told stories about famous people,
They had an older
writers, black
couple that
writers
was
and
in
stuff.
like Beverly Hills, I think. I
Hmm.
think they were in California or something like that. And I think they were. I think one may have been a World War II veteran. I'm
Yeah.
but yeah, because again, when we look at you hear these places, like if anyone remember years ago when Bill O'Reilly was still on Fox, he used to always talk about how he grew up in a city called Levittown or whatever. There's a bunch of places in this country called Levittown, and they were essentially built by white World War II veterans who got not home loans but home grants. They essentially gave them grant. They essentially gave these homes away, so they gave it to them for free.
Yep. Yep.
And
And Bill
so
O'Reilly's
this is
running
how
around
you
here
got
telling us
Beverly
that we got to
Hills.
put. He was a beneficiary of white flight where they gave them there was no interest loans to his parents, and he grew up in one of those communities.
Yeah.
And he's out here on TV talking about we need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. It's real wicked how these people get down when you know the history, and we were not afforded that at all. And matter of fact, when you had upwardly mobile black people back then, the engineers, the doctors, and lawyers at that time, they wouldn't let them get in that community. And if they did, if they happened to let you in, they gave you one of the worst properties, and they gave you a high ass interest rate. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it was just some real foul stuff going on back in the 60s and 70s.
Well, yeah, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and so so I remember, well, he died from prostate cancer when I was a kid, but I just remember, talking with him when I was a kid, growing up in Chicago. He talked quite a bit about what was going on in Chicago post World War II, and just how, essentially how Black folks, it used to be reversed. The South Side of Chicago actually used to be all white, if people didn't know. Prior to the 1950s
Yep.
and 60s, it used to be all white, because you had Ford plants. You had a Ford plant there. There was, I want to say there might have been a couple Ford plants, or at least one Ford plant and maybe a Chrysler plant or something like that. But however, it switched. It switched in the latter part of the 60s, and the whites left the South Side of Chicago, migrated to the North Side of Chicago as we currently know it. And so now what's happening is that you're seeing the reverse happening now, where whites are migrating back to that upper South Side of Chicago, and Black folks are being further displaced outside of the city. So
Bronzeville, Hyde Park.
yeah, my cousins grew up in Bronzeville, and if you go to Bronzeville now, man, there ain't nothing but $500,000 townhomes in over there.
Just 500,000? You sure?
It was just starting to get that way when I was there, man. This was like maybe 2012, 2013. And I remember my wife was telling me at the time, like, historically what Bronzeville was. And it basically, it's now like the equivalent of, like, if you go to like Los Feliz or Eagle Rock or some shit like that out here in California. It's kind of more of like a mixed kind of, mixed millennial, mixed family, like you said, $500,000, Brownstone, Starbucks on the corner, Whole Foods, type of joint,
It's out there.
That's what I was saying. You sure it's just 500,000? Because these prices are crazy.
It's a lot more than that.
They are bugging.
No,
I saw
no,
800,000 townhome in Northern Virginia, Alexandria. I was like, who the hell is working to pay for $800,000 townhome?
Yo, no, when you like, and Dr.
townhouse.
Dr. Phoenix can vouch for this one. Like, when you get over into what, Oak Park.
Oh yeah, that's west. That's
North
west
Side, Lincoln Park. When you get over there, then
yeah. See, Oak Park, Lincoln Park, you the minimum buy-in in those places are at least $1 million.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
At least $1 million. Even if you go a little further, if you just go a little further north and you go into Bucktown and Wicker Park, at the turn of the century, so in the early 2000s, that place was actually relatively affordable. So you had Bucktown, Wicker Park, and Humboldt Park. Humboldt Park used to be what, if anyone's familiar with Chicago, that's what that's what they call Puerto Rican town, because you go there as a big Puerto flag or whatever, right off
Puerto Rican,
right off the division and all of that. And so, but anyhow, if you go there now, if you go to Bucktown and Wicker Park, that's trust fund. There's nothing but trust fund babies over there. $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million, $3 million loss in homes over there. And just 10, 20 years ago, you could have found a home over there for maybe about a couple $100,000.
Wow.
So I mean, what they've done and how they've been able to strategically displace Black people specifically from these various parts for a city like Chicago, has been, has had these detrimental effects, because there's like one hospital that used to be infamous back in the day in Chicago called St. Bernard Hospital. Is on the far south. It's on the south side, right around 63rd Street, right off of the 90. And then there was another one that was actually over off of Martin Luther King Drive on 29th, called Michael Reese. And that hospital closed down. But it was infamous because a lot of Black folks were born there. Very, but again, considering what you've seen happening in a place like Chicago, and I think Chicago's a good bellwether for what redlining really is, and how it's affected Black people and Black children, is understanding that Chicago is infamous for his damn near 2 mile long housing projects.
Yep.
So everything from Cabrini Green, Robert Taylor Homes, Ida B. Wells, you know, we used to call them the Ickies, stuff like that when I was growing up. But, you know, I had family members that lived in the Robert Taylor Homes and lived in Cabrini Green.
I think Lionel lived there for some time. I think those are the ones Lionel lived in for some time.
Yeah, and those and when
Taylor.
you're considering the children that grew up in those environments, those were the children that typically presented with numerous health issues. It wasn't just sort of the physical ones that you can see with like the asthma, the wheezing, you know, and the bronchitis. You know, they're considerable cognitive and neurological dysfunction. You know, just in general, when we're just these children came from environments where economic access was just not feasible.
Wow.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up a point too, because back in the day when we used to go to these elementary schools, K through 12, a lot of those schools had lead paint on the window sills and before they replaced the windows and whatnot, and even inside the building, a lot of lead paint was used. A lot of people didn't know that. The kids would be in the back of that classroom, you know, munching on the chips that was coming off of the windowsill.
Yeah, you know what because you know in 1970 where they allegedly outlawed lead paint, they never required property owners or these, you know, commercial property owners. They never required them to completely remove it. So what they did was just paint over it.
Yeah.
And so they painted over it, and then the paint got really old, and then it starts to chip and flake off, and the kids start to chew it. Lead paint tastes sweet to children, so they just eat it.
Yeah, it's like Reese's Pieces to them. But the bridges too in these black neighborhoods, you know, like the railroad bridges, they found out here all of those bridges had lead paint on them, and so recently, because you walk under it every single day, so you're basically you know, the chips and stuff are falling down in your hair, the radon or whatever you want to call it falls into your hair and whatnot, to your follicles and whatnot, and it actually has a massive impact on a lot of black children walking to school and back home, and they didn't know that. But recently they've started to scrape all the lead paint off of those bridges and actually to repaint them. So they had to shut down the neighborhoods for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks and close it off. They had these big tarps over the bridges, and they had these guys in hazmat suits to go out there and scrape all that stuff off and then go back and paint it and stuff like that. So you couldn't even walk there. Recently, so they figured this stuff out.
Yeah, you know, something I did wanted to highlight because Complex had mentioned it earlier about childhood obesity and diabetes. You know, part of the redlining, one of the major effects of redlining is that it forced Black people into areas that were literally food deserts, as you all mentioned earlier. And the effect of that, the outcome of that, is that you typically had what should have been legitimate, major grocery chains replaced by more of these corner stores. And just places where, you know, they accept EBT or WIC or whatever, and women would go there and get their infant formula. And I'll talk about that on some other time because I think that's a major problem, giving babies infant formula. But I'll say this to say that, you know, they would go there buy infant formula. They would buy, they buy stuff like milk and meat that's obviously very old, and these folks wouldn't even sell it to their own people, but they'll sell it to Black folks.
Wow.
And,
well, you know, Dr. Phoenix, the even more nefarious part is that, you know, you can go, and Mike and I discussed this previously, you can go and use EBT at farmers market. Well, actually, I think you and I talked about this too. You can use EBT at farmers.
That when you was talking about
right? So in the better areas.
Yeah, the gardening co-ops.
Yeah, right. See, in like the better areas. So I noticed this in Chicago, for example. So like if you're going to the farmers markets over, it's like Hyde Park, for example, or something like that. Dude, you saw like all these quote unquote, like, you know, yuppie white folks who in these expensive areas using EBT, and filling up their shit with, you know, all organic produce and all that type of shit. But see, the same people that have those vouchers don't really know that they could actually go to those areas. They don't have the means or the way to get over to those type of areas to use that money to buy fresher produce.
You know, it's
So
ironic.
there
you
is
mentioned
even
Hyde Park,
on the ET level, there's that. Oh, why? What's up?
because Hyde Park is a prime example of how you can have Hyde Park is oftentimes considered an oasis because Hyde Park, the major draw to Hyde Park is the
Mhm.
University of Chicago. You
It's
know,
just
so
yeah,
and because
university
Hyde
that's
Park
there.
in general is an old money area, you find a lot of Quakers over there. You know, it's nothing but mansions
Mhm.
over there, but it borders Kenwood, Jackson Park, and Brownsville. And
Right.
so if you were to look at Hyde Park would literally be this oasis in the middle of all these black neighborhoods.
Yep.
And so there's
It
all these little
literally
invisible
is.
barriers that are designed to really keep folks out. So if you
It
go to
also
Hyde Park,
borders the lake too.
yes, it does. It borders the lake. It has an there, you know, you have the university police, which is really the real they're just really actual police officers, except they just function as you know, police for the University of Chicago. But if you go there, they patrol that area outside of University of Chicago. So
Sure the hell
it's not
do.
even just the campus itself. They patrol that entire area of Hyde Park.
Mhm.
And so what I'm getting at is that redlining is not just a process of putting you into an area, it's also the process of keeping you out of an area.
Yep. Yep. Basically, there's basically sanctions on black people, and no different than what they did to Cuba, Venezuela, and a lot of these other countries that they don't agree with. You know, they basically uh, put you inside of a concentration camp.
Would you call it like domestic sanctions?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of these areas, like you talking about in Chicago, if you was in a helicopter and you really look down on them, they just open their prisons.
Yep.
Pretty much, you know what I mean? And they protect the board as well. That's why those areas are policed, not internally. That's why there's a lot of nonsense happening inside the ghetto. But if you go to the outskirts of the hoods of Chicago, you'll find more police presence. Why? Because they're protecting the quote unquote borders. You know what I mean? And it just is what it is. And it was like that in the 80s in New York. You know, where I
Well,
grew
I
up.
mean, it's still like that, even like on the south side, right? So where I was staying, where my wife is from, and Dr. Phoenix can attest to this. She's over in Rosen. So in Rosen, you have the Chicago State University, and it's the state police that patrol that area because it's a
Mhm.
state institution, right? You see, so there's a different there's a different police authority that's patrolling that area. And just like Dr. Phoenix said, it's not just the campus, it's Roseland.
Yeah. Let me jump to the next article. This one is from the conversation. Study racism shortens lives and hurts health of blacks by promoting genes that lead to inflammation and illness. This is interesting. Negative social attitudes such as racism and discrimination damage the health of those who are targeted by triggering a cascade of aberrant biological responses, including abnormal gene activity. Dr. Phoenix has talked about this in the past. It is not surprising that reports documenting lifespan and causes of morality have demonstrated a clear pattern. African Americans die sooner and bear a heavier burden of many diseases, including hypertension, heart disease, dementia, and late stage breast cancer. Scientists have searched for genetic causes to health disparities between blacks and whites and have had limited success. The strongest evidence to date points to social environmental factors such as poverty, healthcare inequalities, healthcare inequities, and racism. Our society is plagued by racism and racial inequality, which is not fully recognized by all, according to a recent study showing that many Americans overestimate our progress in fixing racial inequality. On the other hand, more Americans are aware that it has become more common for people to express racist or radically insensitive views, according to a US survey. Racism is not merely negative attitudes or treatment from one person to another. Racism has deep historical roots in American society, sustained through institutional policies and practices whereby people of color are routinely and systematically treated differently than whites. And as an African American white individual, I often experience comments growing up like, "You don't sound black," and "What are you?" that made me cringe. In college, I became intrigued by the field of psychology, as it was a field that explained how prejudices, stereotyping, and racism arise. My research as a clinical psychologist at USC is focused on understanding how societal factors interact with biology to create disparities in health outcomes. A recent study I co-authored showed that racism promotes genes that turn on inflammation, one of the major drivers of the disease. Although racism may be less overt today than during the 20th century, government policies and norms, unfair treatment by social institutions, stereotypes, and discriminatory behaviors are sobering reminders that racism is still alive and contribute to earlier deaths in addition to poorer quality of life. For example, Blacks are more likely than whites to receive drug testing when prescribed long-term opioids, even though whites show higher rates of overdose. African Americans have shouldered the burden of racism for decades, creating a level of mistrust for societal systems, be it healthcare or law enforcement. Terms such as driving while black illustrate how racism and discrimination have been deeply embedded in African American cultural experience. Just imagine trying to buy a home and being turned down because of your race. This is too common of an experience for African Americans. Nearly half, 45%, reported experiencing discrimination when trying to find a home and receiving health care, according to a Robert Wood Johnson survey that was developed by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and National Public Radio. So Dr. Phoenix has talked about racism in healthcare and why that could possibly be the case is we don't actually, we're not driving the initiative.
Hey, Mike, if you don't mind, I would like to actually share something with you guys. Being over here in Germany, I had a couple experiences talking to some Black men who've been over here 20, 25 years. They've left America and never came back. There was one brother I met at an auto shop, and we was outside talking. I asked him how long he's been here, and he's been here since '79, you know. And the common theme between all of these brothers is the same. I mean, these are different people. I'm talking at different times. And every last one of those Black brothers, these older brothers, told me, you know, if I go to the States, I usually don't want to be there for more than a week or two, because, you know, I just go see people when I go home. I can't stay there too long because they've been traumatized. And one of them even said, you know, if I be there more than 2 weeks, I start feeling anxiety. And the two reoccurring issues that they had being in America was, one, dealing with the police. You know, I don't get pulled over, no, you know, none of that stuff. I don't have to worry about getting pulled over and being harassed and all that kind of stuff. Because you got to remember, these brothers are coming out of the early 70s into the 80s, you know what I mean? So when we were dealing with police harassment a lot, it was undocumented back then, but it happened a lot. And it happened in the dark. So you could just walking down the street going about your business and, you know, come here, boy, you know, that kind of stuff was still going on. So these brothers got into the military, you know, left America, and they can't go back. And the other reason was, you know, they feel like, you know, they got this common theme of being free or feeling like a man, you know, or feeling like a human being over here. And I can attest to this because I'm a strong brother and I'm built for war. So being in America, I was used to it. But being over here for a year, I can't explain to y'all how stressless it is being over here. There's so much shit we deal with as Black men that you don't even realize you're going through, especially when you got a mindset like me. Me, I'm a can do, no excuse, get shit done type of dude. Whatever's in my way, I'm gonna knock it over or jump over it. But I can't ignore the fact that being over here, there's a lot of things I just don't deal with no more. A lot of pressures, a lot of things you just don't deal with. You don't even just the anxiety of going through an expensive neighborhood and and worrying about getting pulled over. That don't happen over here because the culture's not like that over here. Now, is there racism over here? Sure, but it's different, because the culture's different, right? Our racism in America is a whole different animal, and I don't think a lot of Black men actually want to appreciate that or understand that because they live in it so much. You know what I mean? There's other racisms you're dealing with in the world, but it's not like it is in America. We don't have that culture of being pulled over, being, lynched. We don't come out of that. You don't come out of that heritage in other parts of the world. They do other things, like they just don't include you. You know what I'm saying? They do that kind of racism over here. They don't include you, or they talk in their tongue, or they turn their back to you. You know what I mean? But they don't harass you. They don't put a gun in your face. You know what I mean? They don't threaten your life. They don't threaten your livelihood, your job, being sued, being false accused. These are things that we deal with in America as Black men coming up, and then we do it to each other too, right? Mm-hmm. We have a lot of that going on inside the culture where we're so harsh to each other. So when you come over here, it all goes away. Yeah. And and I see why these brothers don't want to go home. It's not that they don't want to be with America, or they just and then some people think, yeah, they would want to be with white women. No, it's not about that at all neither. That's why I'm interviewing a few of them so they can give you the real rundown. Actually, being with a German woman or an Italian woman or whatever is actually like 4th or 5th on their list because they are more they're nicer and more catering because that's their culture. But there's other things that go on in America that we deal with as men that these guys have pointed out to me that they don't have to deal with over here. I just wanted to throw that out there. So when you talk about stress, we all know what stress does to the human body. And right now I'm gonna pitch it right to Dr. Phoenix.
I was gonna add to that. I've always read like guys who, I think it was reading A.G. Gaston's book. He was talking about being in World War II and being abroad, and literally every Black person I've talked to, they always talk about leaving America and going abroad, and it's just this weight off their shoulders. Yeah, so I hear everything you're talking about. There's actually, I believe, a Vice documentary that talks about Black people who moved to, I believe it's Japan, and that's the same thing. They feel like a human being. That's what I've heard every time.
Well, the great Paul Robeson said when he went to the Soviet Union, he went to Moscow. He said he felt human there. He said it was he didn't say it was no racism, but he said he was treated better there than in the United States.
Yeah. Like I always was blown away by guys who were Black, military veterans who went abroad and actually came back. Because I remember reading World War II, and I think it was, like I said, I think it was Arthur A.G. Gaston's book I was reading, and he even talked about contemplating just wanting to stay. Because he was talking about people would have them over to their house for dinner, things like that. Back in 1940s where, segregation and all of that. He was like, just little things like that you just wouldn't have in America.
I was at a friend's house, a German house, for Thanksgiving this year. I didn't come home. And it was like the United Nations in there. You know what I mean? Real relaxed, making cocoa from scratch. I even made some videos about it and dropped it in Discord. But I will say this about the brothers who do come back, and I've talked to some of those too. Because I got a brother named Joe who's going back. See, a lot of other things is economics over here too. You can make a lot of money over here, save a lot of money. Because when you're living over here, you're not paying state tax, right? And you're also not paying German tax because you're not a German citizen. And that's why a lot of women choose you, because you are a come up over here. I make way more money than the average German. All right, way more money than the average German. So these women they lined up to catch you, and then they have their system and their healthcare system, and they have some what's it called, basic incomes that they get, through different programs over here. So universal basic incomes that they get through certain programs over here. So it's a good lick when you could bring a brother in, or even a white GI, and marry him, and then you get the best of both worlds. You got a guy that's not paying taxes. He's not paying state taxes. He makes more money than the German. Then you have all the benefits as a German woman as being a part of the German system. And it's like that in a lot of these socialist countries. So, but what a lot of brothers do go home is because it's like a hybrid. They'll go back home after they make their money. That's why I'm over here. I'm over here for 5 years on a 5-year assignment. I'm coming back with a crazy bag. You know what I mean? So I'm going to buy property. I'm going to do my thing. I'm coming back to do my thing. And that's what a lot of brothers do when they come back. They come back, they buy property, buy a house where they want. They live where they want, you know what I mean? And that's their little solstice that they get. So they don't take the full leap of leaving the country, because there's a lot of sacrifice with that. You lose your family. you lose your friends. You know what I mean? You're in a country where you don't speak the language, and you have to learn the language. A lot of these brothers over here are from Mississippi and Detroit, and they fluent in German because they had to learn the language so they can get along over here. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of sacrifice that comes with it. It's not easy. But at the same time, I get it. You know what I mean? Because being a black man, like I said a minute ago, being over here, it is so stressless. I mean, it is so stressless over here, man. I'm chilling. I have no worries in the world. Yeah, there's certain, Germans who walk past me and roll their eyes and all that, but they don't say nothing to you because you know why? In this country, and I'm gonna shut up on this. In this country, they decided to be civil. They made it, you know what I mean? They made a decision to be civil. Let me give you a quick example. Over here, they can't call me a nigga. If you do that, that's a heavy fine for Germany. That's 2,000 euro, and the most of them can't afford that. Same thing with fighting. They can't get in fist fights over here. They get in trouble. Now, back in America, you can run around with Confederate flags and call people niggas and be crazy on YouTube and talk crazy. Or you could be very uncivil. America is a very uncivil place. And I didn't realize that until I got over here and then went to, Amsterdam and, skate over to Belgium, which is like an hour and a half from my house. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? And I just saw people just living life and going about their business. And if they don't like you, they just leave you alone. They don't mess with you, though. But in America, people mess with you. And it's not just racist white people. It's also black people. You know what I mean? We just very uncivil.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, in Germany too, I had a friend who was a German exchange student. He was saying, like, kind of like you were saying with the Confederate flag here, there's a whole lot of shame associated with the Holocaust in Germany, as well as monuments to people who died, and
you
as well
can't
as they
throw
took
no
down
swastikas up here.
exactly.
Yeah.
So going back to what you said, lack of civility in America.
Yeah, because it's in constant strife, right? It's always white people, the white majority trying to superimpose their views onto black people, and that resistance that that black people have developed is what causes a lot of that. And so we're unlikely to conform to some of their ideals. Let me go finish this article real quick. Until recently, we scientists did not know the mechanism linking racism to health. The new study from my lab here at USC and colleagues at UCLA shows that the function of genes may explain this relationship. As it turns out, our study showed that genes that promote inflammation are expressed more often in Blacks than in whites. We believe that exposure to racism is why. We previously showed how activating racism, such as asking people to write down their race before taking an exam, in the form of stereotyping, impairs brain functions such as learning and memory and problem solving in African Americans. This may partly explain the higher rates of dementia in African Americans compared to whites. That's very interesting, man. Researchers have well documented that that chronic stress alters the function of brain regions such as the hippocampus that are targeted in brain diseases such as Alzheimer's disease. This work has been expanded through the field of social genomics, largely pioneered by my colleague Stephen Cole at UCLA. A relatively new field called social genomics demonstrates how the function of genes, termed gene expression, is influenced by social conditions. Genes are programmed to turn off and on in a certain manner, but those patterns of activity can shift depending on environmental exposures. Certain marginalized groups demonstrate abnormal patterns of gene activity in genes responsible for innate immunity. Innate immunity is how the body fights off and responds to foreign pathogens. Dr. Cole named this pattern sequence of gene activity the conserved transcriptional response to adversity. That's a very interesting term. It refers to the how, this is it's poorly written. It refers to how genes controlling innate immunity behave under positive or negative environmental conditions. When environmental stress like socioeconomic disadvantage or racism trigger the sympathetic nervous system, which controls our fight or flight responses, the behavior of our genes is altered.
If you go back and listen to some of the previous health talks you and I did, Mike,
Yes,
I talked specifically about socioeconomic stress and how it triggers the sympathetic nervous system. So, I mean,
Yeah, you've waxed lyrical about this. So it's interesting that you have a biracial woman actually confirming this type of stuff. And her picture's up there. We're gonna go look at that in a few seconds. When environmental stresses like socioeconomic disadvantage or racism trigger the sympathetic nervous system, which controls our fight or flight responses, the behavior of our genes is altered. This leads to complex biochemical events that turn on genes, which may result in poor health outcomes. The conserved transcriptional response to adversity profile is characterized by increased activity of genes that play a role in inflammation and decreased activity of genes involved in protecting the body from viruses. We found that blacks and whites differ in the pattern of which pro-inflammatory and stress signaling genes were turned on. Our findings are particularly important because chronic inflammation ages the body and causes organ damage.
yeah. So when they're saying pro-inflammatory genes, they're talking about cytokines, and it's a protein, but it's also a peptide. But there's a group of them like interferons, interleukins, and these are all involved in inflammatory response. And so they do cell signaling. And so in situations where there's elevated stress, so for example, you might be financially insecure or you're food insecure, those pathways get activated.
Interesting. As my colleagues and I pulled this study together, we took into consideration the health disparities such as socioeconomic status, social stress, and healthcare access. For example, we recruited African Americans and whites with similar socioeconomic status. We also examined racial differences in reports of other types of stress events. Both groups reported similar levels of social stress. For this particular study, none of these traditional factors explain why African Americans had greater expression in pro-inflammatory genes than whites. However, we found that experiences with racism and discrimination accounted for more than 50% of the black-white difference in the activity of genes that increase inflammation.
Okay, quick, let me I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Go ahead, go right ahead.
You know, part of what this study is really getting at is that it's showing you that stress is pathogenic. It's pathogenic, meaning it causes disease. But specifically, that last paragraph you read where they cannot explain it, there's also a body of research now that's been emerging discussing epigenetics and how there's, at least anecdotally, there are suggestions that are saying that, if that the stress and the physiological response to stress that Black people have, they're thinking that it goes all the way back to slavery, and that the trauma of slavery altered the genes, and that was passed down through the genes into what we call present day Black society, which may explain why you have these disproportionate responses to physiological responses to stress among Black people as opposed to white people or even other groups of people. And in a nutshell, what I'm getting at here is that there's a body of knowledge that, at least anecdotally, is saying that a lot of the physiological stress response that we have may have been something that was initiated during slavery, and we inherited that.
Yeah, and they also found that here recently within the state of Massachusetts that although Black people make up less than 20% of the population, they actually make up 80 to 90% of the traffic stops within the state. And so they said that Black people, more importantly, Black males who flee the police because of this sort of triggering, not because they're guilty, but because of the fear and experience of law enforcement in the government itself.
Yeah, I've heard a journalist who has a podcast I was listening to. He said that same thing, like culturally as well too. He was telling the story about a guy who ran from the police, and he was saying he didn't even think he did anything wrong. It was just culturally, even that was just your response to it, because you always associated police, government, like you said, negative experiences.
Yeah, and so what they've done recently is they actually have to stop doing that. Stop pulling over black people just for the sake of pulling over black people. That has to stop. So I don't know where they are right now with the statistics on that, but that was, the article is kind of pointing to what they found also, that this is a public health issue.
Yeah, I mean, Madison, Wisconsin, a couple months ago declared racism as a public health issue. And this came out of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But also, too, if back earlier part of that article you were reading, it was talking about the hippocampus. And if you remember, 10 minutes ago when I was talking, I was explaining that limbic system. The hippocampus is part of the limbic system. But also, too, understanding that cells divide. So all your cells, whether they're the gamete cells, which are your sex cells, or your somatic cells, which are your body cells, they all undergo cellular division. And so what happens is that you have something called telomeres. These form the ends of your chromosomes. And so every time your cell divides, those telomeres shorten. And so that shortening of those telomeres is what causes disease. Specifically, it limits the number of times your cell can divide. And once that cell no longer can divide, it dies. It becomes what is known as senescence, meaning that cell has lost its ability to divide and proliferate. But also telomere shortening also can lead to development of cancer, also can lead to development of Alzheimer's.
Wow.
And so, I'm not trying to make this like too geeky and science, real science here. I'm trying to keep this trying to keep this as lay term as I possibly can. But what happens is that when cells, when those telomeres shorten and as they become senescent, they lose that ability to divide, but at the same time, that senescence could also lead to the lack of differentiation between cells. And that lack of differentiation between cells can cause autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, or it can lead to apoptosis, which is programmed cellular death.
What's the impact of that?
That ultimately means people experience stuff like heart disease, brain death. So what like I said, I'm not trying to make this, not trying to give folks a lesson in molecular biology here, but I'm
here for it. I'm here for it. Keep going.
Yeah, I need some CMEs myself, so.
but what I'm getting at here is that, for Black folks, what we need to understand is that, racism is not just the socioeconomic part that we experience, but it's really this all-encompassing experience that also includes our health. Yeah. So it's everything from how we even think about, just our going through our daily lives and understanding maybe the food choices we make, or understanding that, well, I thought I was healthy, but I'll give you a better example. If you go back in December when we did that one about maternal fetal health, Mike, and I talked about that. And if you go back to why you see elevated rates of even Black women having stillbirths, meaning that's basically the point of not really a spontaneous abortion, but essentially you have an abortion that occurs beyond 6 months. That's what a stillborn is. But however, when we look at all those factors that were present around, so you're dealing with socioeconomic insecurity, you're dealing with maybe your everyday lived experience encompasses having to deal with these what at least in academia they term microaggressions. I don't believe in that term because there's no such thing as a microaggression. There just it cannot possibly be, because it has to be a very conscious choice.
Okay.
However, that's how academia terms it. That's what we'll use for the purpose of this conversation. And so understanding that the everyday lived experience of Black people can influence how all those genes express themselves. So it is everything. So every time your cells are dividing right now, Every time if you cut your hand, your cell divide. The process of blood clotting and then new skin having to form over that cut or whatever to seal it off, that is cellular division.
Can you give an example of a microaggression? I've heard that term, but I've never really fully understood it.
So a microaggression would be like you went to go buy a car, and if you ask your white friends what was their credit score, they might say, well, I had a 650, but I got an interest rate of 4%. But you had a 650, you got an interest rate of 12%. That's a microaggression.
Now, would you also say a microaggression would be similar to a white woman who clutches her purse when she sees a black?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Walking
if you're walking past them on the street, they might clutch their purse or they might move to the other side of the street.
I guess what I was going to say, I guess.
A quick example.
Okay.
You in the office and you trying to, be part of a team, improve yourself. And every time you speak, like I just did, complex design, you get cut off or people ignore you, you know what I mean? Or they look you off or they turn their back to you. You know what I mean? These are things that we go through, and I've seen this happen to brothers who had a doctorate. I had a brother named Dr. Stone. And I just saw how some of the, his white colleagues would try to play him off. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah, these are things that we have to deal with. And it's very subtle how it's happening because it's happening fast, right? You're in a conference room and it happens, but it happens all the goddamn time, man. That is stressful.
Okay. No, because I was going to say the first one, Dr. Phoenix, you said, I thought that'd just be straight up discrimination, like you catching a lawsuit type of deal. But no, I get what y'all are saying. Part of it is I grew up in the South, so I'm so used to blatant in your face racism, the slight things probably throw me off.
Yeah, like a police officer calling you boy.
Yeah.
Don't look at me, boy.
I mean, that's what you hear something like that in the South.
Yeah.
So that'd be straight. That's straight in your face. You don't even have to think about what's going on.
All right, let me finish the last paragraph. So what do these results mean for future health? I believe racism and discrimination should be treated as a health risk factor, just like smoking. It is toxic in health to health by damaging the natural defenses our body use to fight off infection and disease. Interventions tailored toward reducing racism and racism-associated stress may mitigate some of its adverse effects on health. As a society, we cannot afford to perpetuate health inequities by undermining or disguising the biological impact of racism. I actually just had a survey call with the Public Health Commission about this very same thing. They wanted to know more about how it impacts Black males. I find that some of the questions to be very, very interesting. I know we're on the. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say no. Go ahead, finish. I do want to hear this because I think this is kind of interesting.
Well, they asked some pretty deep questions, not just about your health, but your interactions with with the system itself. There have been many cases of Black males who have been abused by police. Undercover detectives. Non-uniform officers who take advantage of them. It's not even a woman. It's actually Black males. In back hallways getting domed out by police officers. Being used and abused by these guys. So it's sort of racism that there was no way to report these type of things. So I think that's what they're trying to study is what was the impact of Blacks living in a racist city or what's considered to be a hostile city towards them.
Yeah, and that's exactly the key right there is understanding that discrimination is a form of microaggression, but also understanding too that it's really those interactions you have and what does that do. That if you have this anxiety about interacting with the police, for example, every time you get around them, what happens? That sympathetic nervous system is going to activate. And I explained this before, how it works is that whenever your body activates the sympathetic nervous system, it shunts blood away from what is considered non-vital organs, your kidneys, the intestines, and it shifts it towards the vital organs, so your lungs, heart, and brain, and to the liver to a certain extent. But the reason that's important is because and whenever you experience stress, your kidneys, on top of your kidneys, you have these two glands called the adrenal glands, and they secrete a substance called cortisol. And cortisol is the perennial stress hormone. And cortisol, elevated levels of cortisol in the body have been known to be pathogenic.
It's what fights off herpes or creates herpes.
No.
Or maybe I'm thinking about the CVS branded cortisol that you use on your upper lip during
No, but in general, it's a steroid hormone, but it's very much related to stress. And understanding that for black men, every time for black men, for example, I would postulate that most black men have some anxiety about dealing with the police. You get around, you might see a police get behind you while you're driving, that you start to feel that heart rate go up. If you listen real closely, you can kind of hear it.
I second that. I second that because when I got over here, when I first saw Posey, even though over here, you know what I mean, I still had an internal reaction to it. But these guys ain't even thinking about me. And they're not going to pull you over. They don't do that here. They don't pull people over for no reason. They don't have that culture.
Do they even have guns?
No,
yeah, they got guns. They got guns in
guns.
Germany. Yeah, they got guns in Germany. Not big ones.
Okay.
They got guns. But when you like when they do like for instance New Year's Eve, New Year's over here is different. It's crazy. I wasn't prepared for it. Everybody when I got over here gave you all these stories about what's going to happen and what you're going to see and this is going to happen but no one told me about New Year's, right? So me and my daughter out in Frankfurt, and people are throwing cherry bombs and popping off fireworks anywhere. I'm talking about anywhere. So just imagine you downtown next to a Macy's and somebody's busting off fireworks right on the sidewalk. Now you get hit in the head by a cop in America for that. You know what I mean? But that's freedom over here they have. So, being in that's what's going on New Year's Eve. The police had, the big guns out. And that's the only time I've ever seen them like that. Is when they had those events and they have, the full, flak jacket on with actual rifles. But most of the time you just see them in, a regular uniform with just a sidearm, and that's it. They don't carry all this stuff that our police carry. And they just don't interact with the public like ours do. They don't mess with us. They don't mess with people. You don't see them pulling people over, stopping people. That don't happen over here. They leave people the hell alone.
I would argue that maybe that they are more of a monolithic society, right? They don't have the history of slavery and things
exactly.
like that. They don't really carry that sort of aggression.
Exactly. Yeah, they don't have that occupying, culture that we have in America. Because in America we had segregation and racism and all that. Yeah, so they kind of occupying us. This is an occupied territory. And if you're driving down the street, and they don't just call you boy, they ask you where you going, what you doing around here. You know what I mean? That's part of our culture.
Yeah, I mean, the occupying force, you can argue that they occupied Poland, but that's another situation for another day. But yeah, to that point, they don't have that sort of traumatic history of oppressing of the people. Whereas in the United States, even it seems like all sectors of white population, whether it's in the government, it's at the schooling, the academy, all that. I mean, we see this with Dr. Tommy Curry right now. He had to leave.
He's in Scotland.
Yeah, he's in Scotland now, right? So you have to get up out of it. I've been to, different events where places like Dr. Umar Johnson would actually be screamed down by our own people, right? This sort of aggression towards the Black male is really is something that's fundamental and only really unique with Black males. I don't really see it too much with other people. It's really towards Black males, especially the more darker complected they are.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
ISIS papers.
Yeah, I agree with that. That was, I can tell you someone that spent a considerable amount of time in academia, that has certainly been, I haven't had people shout me down, but I've had people that try to challenge my knowledge on stuff.
Yep.
They find very very subtle ways of trying to do that. But as usual, I stand firm because I know what I know. But I say it to say that, you know, when we think about, you know, how stress causes a physiological response in the body, and going back to this idea of how, you know, for example, you at least I've heard this throughout my life. You know, you have that, you know, a lot of black men have that talk with their sons. You know, they tell them about how you interact with the police, or whatever the case may be. But also understanding that, you know, even with that talk does not take into account that your child, now you just had to put a worry into your child. Now this is something your sons have to worry about. You know, they have to worry about every time a police gets behind me. If I make one false move, it may be the last day I live on this planet. And understanding that in of itself is a stress factor.
Yeah, I was going to add too, Mike. You were talking about black men and the aggression towards them. I was going to say too, I was reading a study that was saying height. Like if you look at someone who's white, a tall white male, for example, that commands basically associates with authority and power, basically all positive traits. Versus if you were a tall black male, it is associated with danger, all these negative traits. So
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of studies that have shown that. You know, a lot of studies out there that have talked about the perceptions of tall, athletic, you know, muscular black men versus everyone else, and how that is perceived among people, specifically white people and white males specifically. White males find that very threat.
oh yeah, I was gonna say that perceptions of age, all of those, like even black boys are perceived as older by
Yep.
people, police specifically. Because like here in DC, they put out a recent law that basically said you can't handcuff. I believe it's kids under like the age of 13 or something like that. And I'm like, well, police aren't going to be able to tell if you're talking about a lot of these black boys because they're going to think they're a lot older than they look.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I mean, I think I think pretty much all of us have seen the videos over the years, in recent years, where you've seen black children being handcuffed and taken out of schools. Like, it's kind of hard for me to imagine a 7, 8 year old child with handcuffs on, with their hands behind their back, being taken out of a school because a teacher thought the child was a danger to her, or whatever the case may have been.
Or even the black girl in South Carolina, where the white police officer
Oh yeah, slammed her.
flipped her out of her seat, out of her desk, because she wouldn't put down her phone.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst for the law being changed. Was the videos that had come out on several occasions of I believe like an 8 or a 9-year-old black kid who was handcuffed. That was the catalyst for them to go and at least try to put this law in. We'll see if it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, and again, I think when we're thinking sort of about, understand something, stress is a cumulative, is a multi, it's cumulative. It's just like when you hear story. It's just like when you're in the summertime and you're having a heat wave. They tell you like you don't want to go outside every day. You want to try to limit the amount of time you're outside every day. You're exposed to the heat because the effects are cumulative, meaning that they add up. It's an additive process, and it's the same holds true with stress. It is a cumulative process, and in many ways, it's probably more or less a multiplicative process because of just the way the body functions. But we'll say it's cumulative for now. But understanding that, you know, each and every time you experience that stressful event, that is your cells divide. Your cells are always divided. And every time you have that stressful event, that means that those telomeres get shortened, which means that you get premature aging, may lead to early onset diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, which is why when a month or so ago, when I had that conversation with the brother TPOT, and I was talking about, you know, guidelines for black men getting prostate exams, Now, the CDC guidelines are put it at 45. I'm telling Black men at 40, you need to get prostate exam, because I'm accounting for the fact that we have all these other stressors going on in our lives that are not accounted for. That certainly, if you're seeing your primary care provider, they're not accounting for, most likely, unless they're Black.
Had mine done when I turned 39 last year.
Yeah. So, and that's a good thing. It's a really great thing. I very much, recommend that to brothers, because like I said, unless, the average, primary care provider where you go for your wellness appointment, they're probably not going to be Black. So they're not probably really accounting for all these stresses you have to deal with on a daily basis. So understanding that all those daily stresses causes physiological stress on your body, and specifically how your genes express themselves, which can lead to some of these premature aging and issues coming up, which is why typically you see the manifestations of a number of chronic illnesses in Black people at earlier ages than you do in everybody else.
Mhm.
And a good example of that is stroke. Last year, around this time last year, John Singleton died. And understanding he was a 50-year-old man that died from a massive stroke. Now, if comparatively, white men don't typically have strokes until they're well into their 70s.
Yeah.
Now
Now,
you compare that to Black men are having strokes 20 years earlier, and understanding that how that has completely potentially shortened your life.
mhm. Yeah, because if you look at a lot of Caribbean and people from the continent, they tend to live very, very long. Somebody like Nelson Mandela lived well into his 90s. Even Robert Mugabe,
Mugabe.
he lived well into his 90s.
Yeah.
One of the things I see, greetings everyone. This is Daniel.
Hey, what's going on,
What's up,
Jonathan?
brother?
We don't get out enough. One of the benefits I've seen being a truck driver for many years is Thursday, you see white folks with their ATVs, their Jeeps, their ski-doos,
Beach.
jet skis. They get out
Hunting gear.
in
Yep.
nature. And when there's a study that came out, homesteading is being looked at as an option for soldiers coming back from post-traumatic stress. And then there's an article I don't know how to do it on this panel,
You can drop
where
it in the chat. You can drop it in the chat.
there's enzymes in the soil that makes you happy, and we have to be honest with ourselves. If just say for those of us who live up north, you live in food deserts. If you do see a park, it's sparse and they rare, versus in the South, we grew up in the dirt, and our health noticeably declined once we went north from various reasons. It's trying to escape, Jim Crow and segregation and the brutality of all of the things we've been confronted with. But we found ourselves in these artificially created environments, which were food deserts. So you in an artificial environment, around concrete all day, hugging trees is good for stress. There's little basic things we can do or start implementing as a culture in our family, where we go to the park, we get out in nature, we take a ride, drop the top when the weather's down, and just get out in nature and just take in some air and get out of the environment of the cities. Because the most we might do on the weekend is go to the club. We're not going, we're not, whereas white folks out, mudding, doing all kind of things. They investing. Now, for those of us who don't have the money, who may not have the money for an ATV or a lifted Jeep to go mudding, or to go hunting,
Yeah.
or to go jet skiing, or you can at least get out in nature and take a nice walk with your woman, interact with your babies, take your shoes off and ground. Basic
Yeah.
things.
That's
Little
kind of a lot
basic
of people in the
things
Caribbean.
we can do.
Somebody just put it in the chat room. The Caribbeans live in to the mid 80s and 90s because they always in nature. They live in on the beach and walking
Yeah.
around and they're outside,
Different diets as
they
well.
party outside,
Yeah, different
Yeah.
diets as well.
You know, one of the
Oh.
most relaxful times I had in my life was probably when I was in Germany, but two, when I was in Morocco. And it was just very relaxing. It was a very simple, laid back life, and it was cool.
Yeah, I was gonna.
At the time I had a lady, it was just chill, we'll go out and just hang out. We'll go to the beaches in Rabat, stuff like that. But I mean, it was just a chill, laid back life. And, I think black men in general don't understand just how important it is to just have a peace of mind and not have to worry about something.
I
SYSB.
sure did. I sure did. I sure did, until I got over here. But here's the thing with me, like I told before, I'm built for war. And I'm still attached to my history. I'm attached to my grandfather before him, and my grandmother before him, and anybody that's entitled to anything in America is us. It was built on our backs. And then if it wasn't built on our backs, people made money at our expense, generation after fucking generation after generation. After all, it's not just what happened to us, it's about also what we did. We've done a lot for America.
Mhm.
We've made America what it is culturally, and not just the wealth, which is a big component, but culturally, all the entertainment, everything we've given as far as, inventions and,
The
music.
wars.
I mean, we fought in every goddamn war. My grandfather fought in the Korean War. My grandfather's grandfather fought in World War I. I mean, look, my grandfather's buried at Fort Hamilton. I'm not forfeiting that. I understand, and like I said before, if a brother wants to say he's saving himself by migrating to another environment because this environment is stressful, then he has to do what he has to do to survive, because it is a stressful environment. And I did not realize how stressful America was until I got out of it. That's why I tell brothers all the time: travel, get out. I'm on a KKcation right now. That's what I call it. You know what I mean? You take a shorter one. Get away from that shit, man, so you don't lose your mind. You know what I mean? Because America is nuts. You know why? I'm gonna give you a quick example. When I'm chilling with my neighbors and German people, and we talk about America, they freeze up because they don't want to say anything negative. But I've made them feel okay about it lately, and they think the stuff that's going on in America is nuts. People being shot down in the streets, like you said earlier, kids being handcuffed. That don't happen here. They would never think of doing that to their people. You know what I mean? And they went through something called Nazism where they got like that for a while, but they don't even think about doing nothing to their people. You don't talk. Let's not even talk about Norway or Sweden. They really laid back. They would never do nothing like that to their own people. So they see what's going on in America, and we so used to it. It is insane what's happening in America. Humanely, it's insane what we go through in America, and no one gets it the worse than us. And my opinion, and I'm gonna say this: I'm tired of it. Enough's enough. I need Dr. Phoenix. I need Mike V. I need Xanatos Clutch. I saw him in the chat room. I need my man over here. I need Mr. Renaissance man. I need my brothers. We need each other, because what's happening right now is we're being replaced. And I can't allow that. I can't allow everything that happened to us. Yeah, I'm just saying, me personally, I'm one man. I can't do it on myself, right? I'm just saying my mindset. I can't allow that. I can't allow everything that happened to us to go unresponse. No response to it. We're going to just bounce. I can't do that. Now, given the fact that some brothers will have the means to leave and move and whatever, that's cool. But I know 19 and a half black men can't. You see what I'm saying? Those numbers right there are the only numbers that matter to me.
The thing is, I wanted to touch on this real quick, because I think Dr. Phoenix may have some insight on this. Do you think that with this new study and understanding of racism in the public health concern, you think the pharmaceutical companies, were prescribing Paxil and all these other sort of antidepressants, will try to cash in on Black people's plight on this?
Well, they already have. I mean, if
They've been doing that.
yeah, they've already have. I mean, again, the pharmaceutical industry as we know of today would not exist without the help of one particular Black person. It wasn't a Black man. It's Henrietta Lacks. If you didn't have that, if they never, prior to them harvesting her cells and figuring out her cells could be regrown in labs and that they were virtually immortal, They had been trying for decades to try to regrow cells, and they couldn't get it done until they got hers. And them acquiring her cells, this was at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Again, Johns Hopkins is famous for a number of things. One of them is too because there was a black man there who practically invented the field of cardiothoracic surgery. His name is Vivian Thomas, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's correct. I heard about him when I was reading.
There was a movie about him, played by Most Def played his character. Called I think it was Gifted Hands. I don't quote me on that, but anyhow.
Yeah.
But I say that to say is that they've already capitalized on black folks, whether we know it or we're willing participants in it or not. But also too, if you go back to the early 2000s, there was a cardiac medication that came on the market that was specifically targeted at black people. And they got this through, obviously, research and all that. They developed this medication through clinical trials and research and all this stuff. But this drug was specifically designed for black folks. They had to pull it for a number of reasons. But if you guys go back and do your research on it, you'll find it. But I say that to say that, the pharmaceutical companies have always been cashing in on our plight. And certainly that's why you see this big push now. I think in the video, they talk about the All of Us program, which is the major precision medicine initiative that's happening right now that was underwritten by an executive order from Obama during his presidency that put billions of dollars, guaranteed billions of dollars. But you got white folks coming out. You got white researchers right now, because I'm running into this problem where I'm at now. You got white researchers and medical providers coming to black folks right now, asking them to sign up for this stuff. But yet they're not telling them, exactly what's going to happen. They're not getting informed consent or none of this. But yet they're asking them to participate, and you have no clue what the ramifications or the outcomes of this research will be for at least the next 50 to the next 50 years to the next century. You won't know, because the research you do now won't affect us. It will affect your children and your children's children.
Yep.
So to answer your question a bit more succinctly, Mike, yes, they've always capitalized on it, and it will never stop.
Yeah, let me ask you this one additional one. You think that the racial inequities and stress that it brings upon black people also causes early hair loss in black men? Like a lot of black men going bald early?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen guys when I was in the military, man. When I was in the army, I knew brothers when I was in Iraq, man. I'm like 19 years old. I knew brothers that, by the time we got back from one tour, man, they were already losing their hair.
That's interesting. That is very interesting. I see a lot of brothers now, well below 40.
Yeah,
all cleaned out.
I was going to say, look at Obama. He's not losing his hair, but look at his hair before he became president and after.
But that is true of any president you see, any man in any high stress job positions.
Mm-hmm.
You see this. You see this all the time. I mean, Obama was in his mid 40s when he came in office. By the time, 2-3 years in, he already had a full head of gray hair. You want to know what telomere shortening does? That was it in real time.
That's crazy.
I was going to add to Dr. Phoenix, kind of piggybacking on what Mike was saying. Wouldn't like ADD, medication prescriptions and all of that, isn't that a way they've already kind of taken advantage of black people with prescribing that stuff to kids?
Oh yeah, I mean they even when you look at issues like even around autism, I mean there's a lot that even how autism, for example, was approached. The original term for autism was Asperger's. But Asperger's syndrome, which I talked about previously, the name came from a German SS officer. He was a physician. He was nicknamed Dr. Death. His goal was to purify the German race. That was his mission. And so any children that the Nazis deemed as not white, as not Aryan enough, he killed them. But before he killed them, he experimented on them.
Wow.
That's where you get, that's part of where you get, that's why you get, in medical and biomedical research, we have something called the IRB, International Review Board. So every institution, all your universities, colleges, any place where there's research done and there are human subjects, they have to every single principal investigator has to submit an IRB. Every single organization that engages in biomedical research with human subjects has a board that is constituted of scientists, physicians, nurses, scientists, PhD level scientists who are responsible for making sure that there are ethical treatment of patients, of clients within biomedical research. And so the IRB came from the Nuremberg trials. And so I say this to say that, when to go back to what he was that Renaissance man that was saying that about
yeah,
the 80s.
that was me.
Yeah, absolutely. We know for a fact that Black males, young Black boys, have been the principal targets of ADD, ADHD medications. Adderall is considered an upper. Is actually a Schedule II medication, meaning you have to have if you're a medical provider, you have to have a DEA license to prescribe Adderall because it's in the same category as crack cocaine.
Yeah, it's a stimulant.
Yes. It is chemically similar to crack cocaine. Ritalin, the other ADHD drug, on the other hand, is a Schedule III medication, meaning that you don't need a DA license. It's considered a low risk for abuse and dependence. Adderall, on the other hand, is because it's a stimulant and because of how it functions physiologically within the body. But yet, you give something that is chemically similar to crack cocaine to a 6-year-old boy.
I did not realize it was that. I knew it was a stimulant. I did not realize it was that similar to crack cocaine, though. That's crazy.
Now, what line of I'm actually to Dr. Phoenix. What line of education in the academy can someone enroll in to learn more about this type of stuff? Is it just the BSN? Is it?
I mean, this is not. I mean, yeah, you can get into healthcare, whether that's through becoming a nurse. Obviously, if you want to get to the level where you can run your own studies. I mean, I'm just gonna keep this real frank with you. Brothers are gonna have to go get PhDs. It's just that simple.
Yep.
You can do you become a pharmacist, do pharma, you get degrees in pharmacology. Obviously, you can go to medical school. All of these, if you want to get involved at this level, you're gonna have to get to the top levels of academia. It's just, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no way around this.
Right, because I'm looking at this little piece right here. It says April Thames. This is the woman who wrote the article. This is April Thames receives funding from National Institute of Mental Health and Alzheimer's Association.
That's one of the 27 schools of the National Institutes of Health. So there's 27 institutes within the NIH. That is one of them. Another one is the Human Genome Institute, the National Cancer Institute, the National Institute of Immunology and Allergy, the National Institute of Nursing Research. I can't remember all of them, but there's 27. There's quite a few of them, and each one of these institutes has a very specific biomedical research focus. And even then, you don't even need to be a part of that. You can go straight into industry. So you can go be at one of these biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, be a senior scientist, be a bioinformaticist, a data scientist. A lot of nurses go get PhDs, for example. They go get PhDs and then they go into industry. They go work for they go work for biotech and pharmaceutical companies running clinical trials.
Medical liaisons?
Yeah, medical science liaisons. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I have a friend who's I think his degree was in biomedical sciences and lab technology. He works actually with the school we graduated from, and he works assisting PhD students basically in research. And he was saying, you know, basically if he's willing to go to school for once a week, he can get his master's. And then, like you said, he can go work in industry, or he can go like look at a PhD or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, and again, because Black men are so woefully underrepresented in these areas, again, you know, the only way we're really going to get a tackle on what's really going on out here with us is that there's going to have to be some sacrifice. I think part of the problem here, and not to deviate from the conversation, but part of the problem becomes that Black men in general tend to be very short-sighted. You know, it's about that immediate gratification and never really that long-term gain. Understanding that, yeah, you can be a Black man and you're making a good amount of money, but to what end? For what? If you die today, what does that do?
Yeah.
You know,
It's
someone
about the hustle.
there's going to have to be a group of us that's going to have to make this sacrifice. Yeah, we're going to have to sacrifice the fact that, yeah, we may not be millionaires 100 times over, but the work we did made it better for the next few generations, for the next generations.
Nah, that's the history.
And,
That's the
and
history
again,
of the race.
Yeah, but again, that requires a lack of selflessness among Black men that, quite frankly, I have not seen among most Black men.
No, you're right. I was actually watching a documentary today on Thurgood Marshall, and it was just talking about how, you know, he turned down basically high profile cases that you can make money off of to take on the discrimination cases, travel to, you know, places like Mississippi, almost got lynched in Tennessee, you know, fighting the case down there, you know, just all the sacrifice he made, and just like you said, the stress on his body doing all that. But, you know, that was a sacrifice he made.
You know, here's the interesting thing. When Martin Luther King was assassinated, when they did the autopsy on him, and you guys can go do your research on this, the pathologist that did the autopsy studied his heart, and he died around, I think he was 39 when he was assassinated.
Yeah.
When
Yep,
they
39, 40.
Yeah, when they looked at his heart, they said that he had the heart of an 80-year-old man.
Yep.
That's crazy.
You know, I don't, when as it pertains to how we're going to get a hand on, just, putting a kibosh, putting a stop to how racism truly impacts us. Because again, this is not just about, the men that are alive today, the grown men that are here today, us that are on these panels or in this chat. No, this is about the fact I don't have children, but I know a lot of you brothers probably do have children. The brothers in chat have children. And so really the effects of what we're talking about now is going to be triple, quadruple for your children. So if we're thinking that racism affects us horribly now, what do you think it's going to do to your children when they have no opportunities?
Right. And nobody did anything about it. Yeah. I think
just to answer your question, I hope that answers your question.
No, that does. Because I think there has to be some follow through as to, well, how can we get involved in the research and the resolutions of a lot of these things. I know Ghana Dan was in the chat. He was talking about opening up a wellness center. I've heard other people talking about that as well. Ghana Dan, are you still on the panel? I think he might be driving. Oh, he's not here.
Hey, Mike, real quick, man, I gotta take my butt to bed.
Yes.
But I want to say thanks for having me on here, man. It was good chopping it up. Dr. Phoenix, you're on point as usual. Always great listening to you, man. I'll be catching playbacks, and you be rocking up here, you and Mike. To everybody else on the panel, man, thanks for participating. I gotta roll out. Gotta make me some money in the morning. This is a real good topic, Mike. I think we need to do this again.
No, I appreciate it, brother. I really thank you, man.
I don't think a lot of brothers really understand what's going on with them and why they so, the hypertension and the sicknesses and, what stress really does to us. This is a real good topic, man.
No, I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, thanks for stopping through, man. We'll have to definitely link up again.
No doubt, man. So I just want to say, business is life and life is business. So brothers, y'all handle yours. I'm out.
Peace.
All right. Yeah, and speaking of the issue of hypertension, a couple of days ago, I was having a talk. I was invited out to a church, and I was having a talk about genetics, and one of the one of the one of the members came up to me and was talking about, I guess this was her brother. He was I want to say maybe he was like in his 50s or something like that, but he was in kidney failure and he's gonna have to go on dialysis. And he has had chronic hypertension. I guess apparently he's on the he's going to get a transplant. And I was explaining to her, yes, he will get a transplant, but he's gonna have the same problem. And the reason he's gonna have the same problem is because the fundamental issue that led to the kidney failure is not being addressed.
Yeah, that's the U.S. healthcare system I've read about as a whole, is that it deals with symptoms and not core issues. That's the biggest problem I've heard.
Yeah, and I am fundamentally in support of that. There needs to be a monumental shift in how the healthcare system deals with disease and pathologies, where it really needs to move away from this procedural, you know, fee for service model. It needs to wholeheartedly remove away from that. I mean, to go away from that, because again, the U.S. spends more money on healthcare than just about every industrialized nation combined. And
we have the worst outcomes.
Yes, exactly. And the outcomes are absolutely the worst compared to everything. And right now, there's a lot of research coming out now that's showing that's demonstrating that the lifespans of Americans are shortening across the board. We know that in this country, Black men have the shortest lifespans of any group of people in this country.
Yep.
Black men on average live to 65. That's what's quoted. That's not what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we had Patrice O'Neal, a famous Black comedian. I mean, he died pretty early himself.
Yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of these your rappers from the 90s, from the 90s, your Nate Dogg's, your Big Puns, was it Gerald Levert, Luther Vandross. You look at a lot of your famous celebrities and musicians from the 80s and 90s. A lot of them, many of them died young. Nate Dogg was 44 when he died in the early 2000s, but this brother had multiple heart attacks and strokes at 44.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely unheard of if you were looking at a white population. But yet we do not fundamentally understand that the impact that racism have, because I think even on YouTube, Black men, there tends to be a lot of animosity between Black men. Obviously YouTube has been a space, at least from what I've seen, Black men just kind of come on and just find ways to curse each other out and do whatever XYZ. And again, we take a lot of dysfunction, we internalize it, and then we shift it to each other. And so go ahead.
No, I was going to add just diet in general. I mean, what we consider soul food, I mean, that's just literally because the culture we lived in, which no diss to them. I mean, our ancestors did what was best for them. Every culture places a premium on not wasting food. But when you look at why people did it and then what we've done with it now, sort of the lifestyle, you sort of start to see some of the drawbacks. And, I think some of it's starting to be addressed, at least for places where I live, trying to help people like understand, make healthier choices. But like you said, taking dysfunction, and sort of sometimes gets ingrained in the culture.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know why they call it soul food. Just eat your damn soul.
But what soul food was an outgrowth of what Black folks ate during slavery. And if you go back to what I said earlier about the epigenetics and about there are studies that have been coming out for a few years now that have been at least suggesting that many of the chronic health issues that Black people tend to be more sensitive to, such as the principal one being hypertension, that they're thinking that the genes that make Black folks more sensitive to the effects of sodium, they're thinking that this is stuff that occurred during slavery and it was passed down. Even the traumas of slavery, they're thinking that was passed down through the genes, at least at an anecdotal sense. So I mean, you know, I've seen cases of Black men having cancer in their early 20s. I've seen cases of where you have you have adolescents that have cardiovascular disease. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, I could never imagine being 17, 16, 17, 18 years old and you're on the verge of having a damn heart attack. And not understanding that, you know, it's not just sort of the impact of living in economically depressed neighborhoods and not having access to food, was also understanding that, you know, racism and the effects of it plays into every single factor of life.
All areas of activity.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I was gonna
And it's
ask.
ironic because you know, Neely Fuller came up with that, but he's a World War II veteran, if I remember correct. Oh, Korean War. Was he Korean War or World War II? I think he was.
I always thought that was Dr.
Dr. Claude Anderson is also a military veteran as well.
Okay.
He was a Korean War veteran. Neely Fuller was I believe Neely Fuller's either World War II or Korean War veteran. I can't remember. But I say that to say that, you know, their thought processes was shaped by the fact that they've got to experience a life that many Black folks don't experience, and how that in traveling ultimately allowed them to formulate these ideas that they have now.
Mhm.
It also
You
was the
know,
catalyst for them to come back and create change too.
When Neely Fuller wrote his book, The Compensatory Code of I can't remember the last name of it, but anyhow, but the point is that he has repeatedly spoke about what he knew, what the ideas and the stuff he talks about now was repeatedly shaped by his experience in the military, and about how he was treated in various places he traveled to throughout his time in the military. And you know, but I do say this to say that, you know, for Black men in particular, no, we need to have more brothers out here that are goddamn scientists that are doing this work. Yeah, you can make quite a bit of money as a scientist. Yeah, you can if you're a good one. No, are you gonna be a millionaire many times over? No, unless you go start your own biotech and it's really successful, whatever.
Or have some patents.
Yeah, exactly. And again, to have patents, we got all these Black folks running around here talking about they goddamn lawyers, but they're shitty ass lawyers. They're piss poor lawyers, because the big areas of law right now is biotech patent law.
Yeah.
I know folks with biology degrees that went to law school and they making tons of money doing biotech patents where they literally patent your genes.
Yeah. I was going to ask you too, when you were talking about things that can be passed down genetically, does that include like experiences of trauma?
Anecdotally, some of the evidence out there suggests that it's possible.
I've heard that, and I think I saw a lady on YouTube talking about it. You know, I obviously understand what you're talking about, where genes obviously change because of the environment. She was more going towards like actual experience can be passed down through genetics. And I was curious if that was reflected in the research you were talking about as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the research, you know, some of the more recent bodies of research that came out that at least suggesting that very well may be the case. So I mean, again, for Black men, yeah, we need there has to be brothers out here that are doing this work.
Yeah, I spoke about this last year. That there was a roundtable discussion. I think it was either CNN or HLN, and they were talking about interracial marriage. In that this Black female, she was a millennial, who said that she's okay with Black women marrying white men, but she was not okay with Black men marrying white women. And I think it was Anderson Cooper or somebody like that, was shocked when she said that. He said that, that's not fair. And she just shrugged her shoulders and said she said it is what it is. And she said her intolerance for Black men came by way of her mother. So because her mother disliked them, that she absorbed a lot of that energy and basically had used that against black men. She didn't know why she was angry. She was just angry because she was angry because she was just angry. She had no real logical explanation as to why there was so much disdain for black men.
So she disdained black men, but then had a problem with who they married.
Yeah, in particular white women. But what I'm saying here is that the intolerance that they had, the sort of misandry that she was alluding to, that I think Anderson Cooper or whoever it was that was interviewing them, there was no real
logical reason why. It was like you said, it was an experience you thought passed down from her mother.
There was no reflection on her behalf as to where it came from, right? It was just, they basically traced it back to her mother, that her mother had such a disdain for black men that she also passed that on to her. And so she was also just as angry as well, but she never had that experience, you see? And so passing down that level of trauma or whatever it was, you know, that she, you're a millennial, you haven't even lived your life yet. You're already having this sort of anger, you know, resentment for black men when you see them, especially with non-black women. So I mean, with with non-black women. So what I'm saying here is that I think a lot of that can be connected.
There's certainly a connection with that. In fact, I would put this out here. If you look at a lot of the stress factors that black men deal with, a lot of it is very much related to those interpersonal relationships between black men and black women. You ask any, you know, psychotherapist, you know, who has black men as their clients, you know, what are many of their stresses, what is much of their stress coming from? 9 times out of 10, it is going to either be related to the society at large, and it's going to be those interpersonal issues between them and whoever's the woman in their life. And understanding that all of that plays into shortening your life, the early onset of hypertension and diabetes, strokes, myocardial infarctions, cancer, you know, and I think a lot of, you know, and black men as a whole, you know, don't really draw those connections. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's so important that black men get out here and, you know, really consider going to medical school, becoming a family practice doctor or becoming a primary care doctor. So you can sit down and have these conversations with brothers. No, you're not gonna be making $600,000 a year as a goddamn cardiologist or GI doc will, but they also work 1,001 hours. Right. Yeah, you'll make a good living making your $300,000, maybe more. Actually now there's a new, you know, not to get off subject, but there's a new practice model that's been utilized for quite a few years now. Direct concierge practice, direct pay models, where you got family practice docs and internists making $1 million a year, but that's neither here nor there. But I'll say this to say they like, yeah, you know, if you don't want to go to medical school, go become a PA. Yeah. You know, become a nurse practitioner. You do the same thing, especially with the nurse practitioner, given just, you know, in our lifetime, nurse practitioners will be their own separate, completely independent healthcare practitioner. So they'll be in competition with the DOs and the MDs.
Yeah, I was reading.
Go though, Dr. Phoenix. How far can they go as practitioners in challenging the MDs? Oh, if you're in a state, for example, I think one of the brothers said he was in DC. If you're in a state like DC is independent practice. You don't need a physician. You can do whatever within the scope of your practice. You're completely in control of what happens with your patients. That's your license on the line, and you better know what the hell you're doing. But however, if you're sitting down and you're talking with black men or part of your patient panel, you're sitting down and talking with these men, you're talking with black men, yeah, you can have those very candid conversations that black men don't often have with their healthcare providers.
Yeah, I
You
was
know,
going to say I read an article where they were saying that part of the barriers to going to medical school for Black men was the perception of like how good your grades had to be or things like that to get in. That was sort of a deterrent where you were just seeing a, you know, basically going off a cliff the number of applicants, as well as then the barrier to finances. Because I knew one person who went to medical school and they said, you know, 90% of the people in medical school were like either an uncle or a cousin or a dad or a mom was a doctor. So those, they were saying those were two major barriers right there.
the same is true of the same is true of nursing, PAs. Vast majority of the nurses and the PAs I've met in my life, they had an immediate family member that was a physician, a PA, or a nurse themselves. So I mean that's you know that's sort of that cultural capital that happens. That's social cultural capital that happens that we don't take into account. That, you know, if you want your child, for in the case of this, your Black males, if you want young Black males to be that physician or to be a PA or MP or whatever the case may be, you have to be that. They cannot be something that they cannot tangibly see. Because I know plenty of folks right now that are in medical school with me that have seen, that have got their, they used to go to career day as kids with their damn mom and dad that are physicians.
Yep.
They went to career day with their mom and dad that was a CRNA or PA or nurse practitioner.
Yep. Because I was going to say too, that just having that person there who's been through the process, who can guide you through those things versus someone who doesn't have that resource is vital.
Yeah. Yeah. We got Xanatos Clutch on the panel, man. What's going on?
Hey, what's good?
Chilling, man. Yeah.
Nice. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. What all of you have said is one of the reasons why I have been more than willing to relocate as needed. I mean, growing up in a predominantly Black area, you would think that, okay, I won't have to worry about a lot of the stressors that a lot of people in other parts of the country, and tell me the wind's loud. I'm just opening the door so I can get some fresh air, like all you suggested like 30 minutes ago. So shout out to that recommendation. But being in a place like DC, you would think that, okay, I wouldn't face as many of the pitfalls or health hazards and concerns that you all touch on this episode. But for me, honestly, it was basically the same stuff, different day. I mean, discrimination, whether it's from outside the race, whites or whoever, or whether it's from your own, from not fitting into the code. I mean, it all has the same effect on you. And I can tell you right now, throughout my time, I've actually been very resiliently healthy throughout my life. I've never had any major illnesses or anything like that, besides the one point that I had, not hyperthyroidism, thyroiditis, which lasted for about like a few months. Had heart palpitations, had an elevated heart rate, lost like 20 or so pounds in the span of like a few weeks. But yeah, as far as that's concerned, your health does come first. And with seeing how this country operates, I mean, the ultimate goal or the ultimate remedy in most cases, I would recommend most men, and this is one of the reasons why I do it, is, leave America. You're going to be treated at the very worst like a human being for the most part, most countries you go to outside the States. And at the best, you'll be treated like a war hero if you run across a group of people outside the country who are aware of what Blacks have to go through and that sort. I mean, right now, my career path, I'm set myself up to do just that. And it actually helps. I'll give you some insight into my personal life. Right now, I've relocated from Salt Lake City to the Bay Area of sorts. And yes, I'll be honest, Salt Lake City is way more open-minded, at least for Blacks, than the Bay Area. Trust me. I mean, I don't know what is it with these assholes up here, but you got some left-wing eugenicists motherfuckers who basically run the Bay Area. I mean, a lot of people say LA shit and the Bay Area is cool. It's like, at this point, the only part of California I'm going to even touch is San Diego at this rate. But the saving grace of me being here is that the job, honestly. So granted, Salt Lake was more open-minded than the Bay Area, but my job it's sort of the opposite. My last job had a bunch of racists, and yeah, and the only reason why they weren't able to touch me to the point in which they can touch an average black man is because let's just say I'm not in the private sector, thank God. But this job, it's much different when you work with individuals who are way more open-minded. And I hate this. I don't want to sound too tribalistic, but it makes a difference when you work with your own people who are willing to help you, who have the same thoughts as you, thinking black men and thinking black women, who thankfully I have one of whom as a supervisor and one of whom as a boss in a sense. And it's just so different. My job, it's way more laid back. I work harder than they even want me to. They're like, yo, Clutch, go home. You've worked like 9 hours or whatever. I'm like, no, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And partially it's just because I want to make a good impression. But the other reason why is because, I mean, when you have people who make your job easier, regardless of race, and especially those who are your own race, get the difficulties of how it is being black in corporate, and not even corporate America, but just being black in the workplace, and they make it easier for you and they got your back. I mean, you want to put in the hours for them just so that they, one, stay with the company, and two, just make them look good. And because they've helped you along the way. And I've noticed that for me, I have been told that I've looked younger than I actually am. When people say I was born during the Reagan administration, people are like, what? But yeah, but I think a lot of that is attributed to me not tolerating being in a place where I'm seen as less than, whether it's because I'm black or not black enough. I wasn't seen as black enough in the good part of DC. And the second I graduated from college, I went to a part of DC that didn't have that BS. And when I moved to Salt Lake, it was an improvement overall in the city, but the job was the first job wasn't too bad. I actually had someone, note a white male, Mormon conservative, who had my back. So for all of you, everyone who says, oh, we have to play tribalism, blah, 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 like extreme tribalism. I mean, that's why I don't really believe in it that much. But the second job was just horrendously just racist, I'll say that. And even then, I only stayed there for like a year and a half. Like your tolerance of stuff as individuals, as black men especially, needs to be low. If you're getting treated with disrespect, then you make sure that whatever you do, one, you make your move, and two, you make them miss you. That's how I've always lived my life. And I think that's a reason why I have had very relatively low health concerns throughout my life.
You know, it's interesting that you say that. There was an article we covered last year that said that black people tend to have high turnover rates in specific certain organizations because of the racism. They were seeing turnover every 6 months, and they couldn't figure out why. But it was all traced back to a lot of the internal racism that was going on. And so black people tend to take flight a lot more often than not. For the very much the similar reasons.
That's the way my job in Atlanta was. They could not hold on to any minorities. Like year and a half, everyone was just out the door, and it was just like new wave coming in.
And it's funny you say that was the case in Atlanta, which is supposed to be the black mecca of all things. You like with all the of the community, the way they speak, it's like you need to be in Atlanta. And the same thing with DC. It's like the number 2 black mecca. You need to be in DC, and if you can't hang in there, then you've got the problem.
Part of what I tended to see was it kind of goes back to what you were saying with you got to have someone who's there, who's willing to help, because what will end up happening is you did have at my old company, you did have people who were black, who were in high level leadership, but they were so disengaged. The company sort of had this buffer where it was like, well, you can't really call out racism because look at our org chart, but you don't really do anything for the lower level employees to make sure that their lives are better. That's what I saw in my situation.
Yeah, a lot of what I saw in DC was the I got mine, you go get yours kind of attitude at best. And at worst, they wanted to be, the HNIC, in which, anyone that was younger than them They saw them as a threat. And, I mean, that's how blacks are, at least in DC. I'm sure Atlanta's probably similar.
Well, that's only because they heard Prodigy's album. So
You know, Zenito said he had
your mic is working, Dr. Phoenix.
okay, I'm sorry.
It's good now.
Does that sound better?
Yeah, that's good. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Zenito said that he had hyperthyroidism. So the other term for that is called Graves' disease. But specifically, because we're talking about the impacts of racism and how they can cause stress, thyroid issues can be very much related to dealing with stress. You can have hyperthyroidism related to stress. But specifically, there's actually a life-threatening complication of hyperthyroidism called thyroid storm. And thyroid storm is essentially what happens, that you get an elevated heart rate, you get elevated blood pressure, and essentially it can cause death. It can kill you. But you do hear this common issue with Black people, especially Black women, having issues around the thyroid. Now, for Black women, is related to some other issues too, but
Yeah.
certainly stress is certainly an issue that can cause an imbalance with your thyroid, and can lead to overproduction of
Very
your
true.
of thyroxines. Well, not thyroxine. Oh my God, I can't think of it now. Well, but anyhow, the point is, you typically see this. You know, I ain't gonna say typically, but this is a very common issue with Black people having thyroid issues, and certainly there's a lot of evidence that suggests that suggests that stress is a major component, at least as it pertains to Black people and having thyroid issues. So just wanted to put that out there because he was talking about that. So.
Cool.
Yeah,
What I had was thyroiditis, but yeah, it was sort of like a temporary version of hyperthyroidism.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for the info.
Yeah. Okay. No, just because I know thyroid issues just tend to be an issue that's pretty prevalent among Black people, and so again, you have overproduction of thyroxine, which is the cause of hyperthyroidism and stuff like that, and you hear all the time, Black women, for example, have Graves' disease, and they develop Graves' disease, and so a lot of that can very much be related to stress as well. So just putting that out there.
Now, quick question, Dr. Phoenix. I know it might be a long answer. Is there a fast track to a PhD in this field of study?
No. No. The short answer is no. Most PhD programs, I've said this plenty of times before. If you're gonna do a PhD, you strongly need to consider doing a PhD in genetics, because all the articles you read, the underlying science it keeps going back to is genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And because when the Human Genome Project ended in 2000, it literally ushered in the new wave of science for the 21st century, the new wave of biomedical research for the 21st century. And it's all built around genetics and genomics. So all of the omics, pharmacogenomics, genomics, metabolomics, proteomics, for example, and how, and as for Black men specifically, if we're going to really get a handle on understanding just exactly what ails us physiologically, what influences our health outside of just the foods we eat, but also understanding that these psychosocial stressors that contribute to our overall well-being, there's gonna have to be brothers do that. No, your typical PhD is gonna take about 5 years. If you're a good student, you can probably knock it out, and I've known people knock out PhDs in 4 years. I mean, you got to be a good student. I mean, if you're a good student, you can get, you're committed. I actually know a young brother right now. He's looking to do a PhD in neuroscience, and so he's motivated. He wants to do this work,
Now,
and that's what it takes. I mean, realistically, no, we need brothers that can get out here that have these science backgrounds. In fact, one of the, there's a brother who's a geneticist. His name is Dr. Kittles. He started the genetic testing company African Ancestry. And he's a geneticist, and he's one of the co-founders and owners, along with a black woman who's also one of the co-founders and owners. And I want to say they're out of DC. I believe they're out of DC, if I remember correctly. They're based in DC.
I was going to also ask, data science as well. Couldn't you go in that way? Because I read something about Obamacare.
All of it. Data science, anything dealing with big data, is you're good.
Okay, because I was going to say, I read something about Obamacare, that one policy requirement was something to do with record documentation. And they were just talking about how it gave them a gold mine of research. Like they were talking about something they figured out about people who live near airports and some sort of disease or something they developed.
Yeah, because part of that is that you have hospitals specifically, you have health organizations that have generated, terabyte upon terabyte health information and data. And so no one knows what the hell to do with this. So you basically have all these health systems that are sitting on mountains of data from, we're talking millions upon millions of patients that, no one, they're now just coming around to figure out what the hell are we going to do with all this data? What kinds of questions can we ask of this data? What is this data really telling us? And so black men who get involved in this, you're going to have some very lucrative careers. But again, this requires a sacrifice. And I don't think most black people are willing to give up. You're not willing to say, well, okay, I'll take the next 4 or 5 years. I will make 40, maybe 50 grand a year, and I will study this. I mean, most likely, yeah. If you're good, you can probably negotiate maybe 40 grand or something, like even upwards of 50. I know doctoral students who making 50 grand, doing their PhD, a year. But again, it just depends. But the point is that you need to have black men need to have they need to make a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And and more importantly, you're going to benefit from this sacrifice. It's not just something, well, I'm giving up making $150,000 a year. No, it's not about that.
Mm-hmm. This
is truly about pushing black men, black people, but specifically black men forward in the 21st century. Do you know how hard it is, brother? I was at an event a couple years ago, man. It was the National Medical Association's there was one of their sub chapters that was having their 90th anniversary, and this was a black tie event. And I was at this event, and I'm sitting in a room with physicians, 90-year-old black men that are physicians, and they're still doing research, brother. Working, I mean, I was in a room with black men who were some of the first scientists to work with HeLa cells. I'm sitting in a room with vascular surgeons, cardiologists. But these men are all old. They're retired.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the sad part? I look around, there ain't enough of us to replace them.
Yeah, that was, I think I heard there were more black doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, physicians during segregation than after integration.
Yeah.
Charles Drew.
And that's the part. I mean, even and whether it's stuff I've heard in my personal life, or even stuff that I've heard in these spaces over the last few months, black men just don't seem to have the motivation to really just lay it on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not about just you, but this is about all black men. This is about the fact that black men have to be committed to taking care of each other. If you take care of black men, black society as a whole benefits from that.
Right.
You cannot mount I mean, despite all the talk about, warrior this, fight white supremacy that, how the hell you go mount an effect? How you go mount a goddamn war against white supremacy and your men are dying at 40 years old from fucking chronic diseases?
Yeah.
Men that are able-bodied and should be fighting, they're dead. They're 30 years old and they're on dialysis.
Half strokes, mini strokes, different strokes.
I've seen brothers done had what we call a mini stroke or TIA, transient ischemic attack. Those are called mini strokes, and it just means that the symptoms come and go, hence the name transient. But I've seen brothers in their 30s had multiple of these, and these are precursors to strokes. And we're not understanding that that's what it's going to take. You look at you go at these universities. Yesterday I was just it's just really hard for me sometimes to be in situations, man, where I might be in a room with all these damn senior scientists, physicians, whatever, and it may be myself and maybe a couple other brothers in the room, but you got more black women sitting in the room than black men. And you best believe the black women who are getting these doctorates in biomedical sciences, getting these doctorates in nursing, getting these PhDs in neuroscience or whatever, you best believe they're dealing with issues that affect black women. Who the hell is going to do it for black men?
Right.
You can't have just one of me doing this out here. There's not enough. I can't fight 30,000 battles. There has to be more of us to do this work. There really does.
Yeah. Yes, somebody in the chat had a question. They asked, what are the requirements for a PhD program in neuroscience and anything like that in this field?
It's basically a pre-med, whatever the pre-med requirements. So whatever the requirements are for medical school, that's pretty much what you need for neuroscience. So usually a year general biology, a year of chemistry, a year of organic chemistry, maybe a semester organic chemistry, semester biochemistry, usually at least one calculus course. Some of them might ask you for two, because there's a subdivision of neuroscience involving computational neuroscience and medical imaging, which kind of really diverges more into the engineering and more into engineering. And so, yeah, typically they might, it kind of depends, but though that's general what you need. And obviously some upper division biology courses like in microbiology, genetics, anatomy, physiology, stuff like that. So that's pretty much what you need. So you basically your standard pre-med curriculum will work just fine.
I noticed a couple of the tier 1 division 1 universities, might be division 2, division 3, but they're starting to accept like computer science majors and
yeah, because you don't have enough folks. Because part of the problem is that, one, you don't have enough folks, but the other part is because there's such a heavy component around data analysis, artificial intelligence, neural networks, data science. That's why. Even a lot of these nursing PhD programs, you go to these top tier nursing schools, you got a lot of nurses out here getting minors in computer science, minors in biomedical engineering, because there's a convergence of all of these disciplines in healthcare, in biomedical research. Even for physicians, you got a very specific program, the physician scientist program, where you do an MD, PhD. Though I would never do that because that's like 8 years. But however, you got folks that are just getting outright PhDs. But if you look at these schools, you look at their programs, you go to these departments, there ain't no black men. You might see a couple black women here and there, but you ain't gonna see no brothers. So, but yeah, I just wanted to put that out. Anybody there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I think Mike's on mute.
Uh-oh.
I was going to ask you, Dr. Phoenix. You said you were in the military. What was your are you a nurse practitioner, or actually a doctor? Like, what was your path? Because I know you said you were in the military.
Well, so yeah, I was in the military. I was actually a medic, and then I got out, did some contracting for a few years. Then went to school in Australia, got a degree in chemistry. Then the VA sent me to nursing school, and then right now I'm in medical school. So.
So you did military first, use your GI benefits to get your nursing degree? Okay.
Yep, my first two degrees. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So how does that work for you now? Do you work for the military while you're in school?
No.
I'm
not.
Okay.
I'm not active duty now. I'm completely. I've been done with the military for years.
Oh, okay.
No. But I did research. So I did a lot of research when I was in undergrad. So I did a program called the McNair Scholars Program. So for anybody that's in the chat that's probably older than 40, they probably are familiar with a black physicist. He was an astronaut too. His name was Ronald E. McNair. But he died when the Challenger exploded back in '86. So he died. He was one of the astronauts that died aboard the Challenger in '86. And so they named this scholarship program was created in his name, and it was actually spearheaded by his brother, who's still alive to this day. His brother is also in bio. His brother's also in STEM too. But anyhow, this program was designed to get underrepresented people into, specifically Black folks, into PhD programs. Mm-hmm. And so, and you go through this pretty extensive research program that you do over the summer, and you have to do a research project. You have to present. You do a lot of traveling to different universities and stuff like that. It's pretty intense over the summer. They pay you a stipend and all that, but it's a pretty intense. But the whole thing was that it was designed to prepare you to go into to get a PhD or to get a doctorate of some kind, but specifically the PhD.
Now, if you could do it all over again, Dr. Phoenix, which path would you go? What would you take?
In all honesty, I still would do the current. I would probably just went straight. I would probably went straight to med school from undergrad. I would have never left undergrad and went into the military. I just finished it up and went to med school because I do like seeing people. I do like having patience and talking to folks, but at the same time, I also like research, and I want to be able to take the research that I do and apply it to a population. And so that's so I wouldn't do it sort of this long convoluted way I've done it now. But again, I didn't have a lot of, when I was coming up, I didn't have a lot of, folks. Hell, I didn't even meet the first Black physician until I was well into my 20s. Mm-hmm. So but I just say that, yeah, and that's why I spend so much of my time, especially when I'm talking to the young brothers, like, man, do this stuff now while you're 18, 19, 20 years old. You can have a PhD at in your late 20s, and you can be well onto your career. You don't have to go through this long convoluted process. Yes, you're gonna forego stuff, but you gotta understand, the average person doesn't really go into the workforce and make any real money until they're well into their 30s. Mm-hmm. Most of your physicians, especially the ones that go doing these really high impact specialties, they're not finishing up until they're in their late 30s, 40s sometimes. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's a sacrifice. Yes, it is. But it's a sacrifice that's worthwhile, and certainly something that we cannot sit here and complain about. The health establishment does this, but yet we have such little representation. You know, everybody gets to come along and exploit us because we don't have enough people out here that are doing this that can really address the masses. And it makes it real easy for somebody with a doctorate in XYZ, you know, a medical doctor or a PhD or whatever the case, and come along and tell you something. But again, if you don't have folks that are knowledgeable in the science and that have the relevant background, how the hell are you going to fight against this?
Yeah.
The way you laid it out was, I think, a really good way to explain it to people about people not making any real money. You could even, I was gonna say, for some professions, you can even push that to 40, because like I said, I was thinking about that the other day with people who I know who are in like pharmacy school or like medical school, things like that. Pharmacy school a little bit shorter, but when you start looking at how much debt they come out in and all of that, and then you look at how much money, I was like, well, what they're doing is actually going to pay off probably more than the dude who's working, just because, like you said, you're not making any real money until probably, like you said, some cases 30s, but I'd say 40s in a lot too, a lot of cases.
Yeah, I would say it's probably more likely 40s. Most of your physicians don't really start making any real money until they're well into their 40s, even 50s.
Medical chemistry, a doctor's in medical chemistry. Interesting.
Here's the thing. Even something like nursing now has gotten so sophisticated, man. It's not what it was. It's not even what it was, 10, 15 years ago. You got folks over here doing PhDs, man, and we're talking 7 years of study. There's some real work that goes into this. And yes, you're not gonna make that you're not gonna make that money up front, but it will pay off over time. But the biggest payoff should be, because we hear all this talk about, helping the community. This is where the rubber meets the road. I don't want to hear nothing about helping the community if I'm in a room and I'm sitting around a bunch of goddamn white folks and there's like maybe 3 or 4 black folks in the goddamn room, and among that you got black folks that don't even know about the goddamn Tuskegee experiment.
Right. They got a Tuskegee jacket. They just don't know about the experiment though.
Yeah. I literally just had this experience. I was talking with my mentor a few days ago, and we were discussing this conversation that was taking place, and there was a black researcher didn't even know about the damn Tuskegee experiment.
Wow.
And she cut the research off and told her, you know what? You come back to me when you learn what the hell this is. Don't come to black folks asking them to participate in research, and you don't even know what the hell the damn Tuskegee experiment is. Mm-hmm. You don't even know who Henrietta Lacks is. And I mean, this is the kind of the crap that's out here, man.
Yeah, I can believe it. I can imagine.
I was going to ask Dr. Phoenix, do you think with the length of these programs, do you think it should really take that long? Because one of the things I've heard when you start hearing people talk about how fast technology is progressing and how we can't fill jobs, you hear people talk about the educational system, that basically it's not producing people fast enough and they've got to do something about it. And I do know a lot of college courses that you go and take, a lot of them are remedial because of the, at least the freshman level courses, because of the people's high school and even some cases middle school schooling. Do you think if you saw like a real change in the next 5-10 years of the educational system, that some of these degrees could be gained at a faster rate?
Yes, I certainly believe medical education, even physician training can certainly be a lot shorter. It doesn't have to be as long as it is. But just even coming out of high school, I think the problem is that it's not that it's just you're not producing people fast enough. The other problem is that you're producing people that are just undereducated. Mm-hmm. You got most black students, man, the first time they actually seen some real math is when they walked into a collegiate environment. Mm-hmm. And by that time, now you're dealing with your non-black peers. And these folks have probably been doing calculus and they've been doing statistics or XYZ, whatever, before they even walked into college. And a good example of that is what I was saying a few moments ago about Ronald E. McNair He changed his major when he went to college. He was a physics major. He changed it to music, and he changed it to music because when he got around his white male contemporaries, they were talking about how they had taken classical physics, they've done string theory, and you know, he just felt so out of place. But this was his first semester of college as an undergrad. These kinds of conversations were happening. And so what has to happen, and Black folks have to take the lead on this, and they have to take accountability for this. You're going to have to be the person that's going to facilitate what happens to your children in these academic environments.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to start from before they're even born, laying out a plan. This is what you're going to do. You know, I know a gentleman. He's a lawyer, and he told me this story about how he became a lawyer, and he talked about that his father was a military veteran, and he's an older gentleman, but he said he has another brother and a sister. His sister's a physician, his brother's a computer scientist, and he was saying that their father, when they were growing up, he decorated their rooms reflecting the career choices he already made for them. So he told them, this is what you're going to be, and and how their rooms were decorated reflected that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that Black folks need to take a real hold of, because again, I think we're living in an environment where, oh well, you know, you should be free. No, the hell you shouldn't. Because you go talk to your Asian contemporaries, you go talk to your Indians and your Arabs, and listen to them. What do they tell you? If you talk to them, ask them what it is, they were told what they were going to do by their communities.
Mm-hmm.
The culture dictated what they were going to do in academia. It dictated why they were sending that damn lecture hall with you at XYZ University.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. I remember reading Richard Williams' book, Serena Williams and Venus Williams' dad, and he was talking about before they were born, he wrote like an 80-page business plan for their life. Now, and I was thinking, if we take that same model and replicate it and put it towards what you're talking about, STEM engineering, you know, look the change we can make.
Yeah, I mean, just fundamentally speaking, I mean, the articles that Mike has read in this talk, you know, the people that are being interviewed for these articles, I mean, these are researchers, these are scientists, these are PhDs. Mm-hmm. There are no bachelors here. There are no masters here. If you want to have some research that can potentially make some real impact, you're going to need a PhD. And just to highlight something that Engineering Cannabis said, the GRE is hard per se, but the GRE is pretty straightforward. It's not like the MCAT. The GRE, if you have a good grasp of general statistics, introductory statistics, a good grasp of reading comprehension, you'll do quite well. What most people jack up on the GRE is the writing section in the quantitative portion. Mm-hmm. Now, PhD programs, yeah, they are a beast. I would never sit here and tell somebody getting a PhD is the easiest thing you can do. No. Lots of folks get depressed during PhD, but you can say the same thing about folks who go to these professional programs, law, medicine, engineering, nursing. Hear it all the time.
I was depressed during undergrad.
Yeah, it happens. That is the nature of the beast. If you're really focused on what you need to do, that is just kind of the nature of the beast.
Mm-hmm. I mean, people get depressed at their jobs too.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is the nature of the beast.
Because the lack of social network actually impacts you in that area. I don't understand what Renaissance is saying about the job, but in the academy it's different. In the academy, if you don't have a whole lot of network support, man, you're screwed, or you can be screwed.
Yeah, I mean, and that network support can be the difference between you getting a career made, which is why I've discussed the McNair program previously. It is a career maker. Mm-hmm. But the problem is now you can't even get brothers to do it. Yeah. Do you know the damnedest time I had to find a brother? I couldn't get no brothers to do it. I had to settle for a Black female she was from Burkina Faso, mm-hmm. and I had to mentor her.
Now, Mike, when you say a network, are you talking about just your peers, or are you talking about the administration? Because I was going to say,
I'm talking about the professors.
because don't they have the incentive, at least if you were at least in a graduate program? It's not a good look on your university if you don't have, your graduates graduating.
Well, it's not
Students.
necessarily your graduates graduating per se. I mean, yeah, that's a huge component with it. But the other component is that oftentimes for tenureship, for example, professors are usually mandated they have to demonstrate that they've mentored some undergrads, for example, that they're creating the next generation of scientists or whatever.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And so that oftentimes that's usually part of them getting that tenureship. But however, when I'm talking about the network, I'm talking about undergrad, because that's where your careers are made. Because if you're not able to leverage that undergrad experience, you just become a person that kind of dangles in the wind or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the reason why it's so important at the undergrad level is because those professors, I've worked on NIH funded projects, and every single one of those times I got a chance to work on NIH funded project is because my mentors knew other mentors that had NIH grants, and they were looking for some students who would be interested in doing research, and that's how my name gets passed along, and that's how that works. And at that level, it is all word of mouth. And that word of mouth comes from you being able to leverage and create relationships within academia that leads to because there are a lot of programs that the NIH funds that are specifically for underrepresented people. But most folks don't know about it because typically a lot of that stuff is through word of mouth. I mean, even if you go to their website, you can find these programs, but usually you have to be recommended for those programs by an investigator. And gotcha. so having, being able to foster that relationship and leverage that relationship at undergrad level is crucial to getting you to that next level.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. When I was speaking about network, I know some people in the chat part will probably listen to the replay on this. Probably think I'm talking about 5G networks. What do you mean black people have 5G networks? What do you mean? LTE. No, NISB is a network. It's a very strong network as well. So I did have that, but I didn't utilize it the way I probably should have. I leaned on more of my peers. So I graduated with a majority Black and brown class of males. So I didn't have a whole lot of white males. In fact, white males were actually the minority and not the majority there. So.
Yeah, no, and that is important. Like I said, to address something that engineering cannabis is saying. Yeah, going back to what you were saying about the PhD program. Yeah, those dissertations and those qualifying exams. Yeah, they're beasts. Ronald E. McNair failed his 3 times.
Wow.
Before he finally passed, and he was a laser particle physics PhD.
Yeah.
And he failed his 3 times, and before he finally passed. And believe me, it's not uncommon. This stuff is hard. This is not for the faint of heart. This is a true test of grit and determination. And the question is, are Black men built for that?
It seems like a lot of them are running away from it. We read an article over the weekend.
That's so disheartening.
Yeah, Black men make up the majority of undergrad dropouts in STEM. And they also least likely to enroll in it. Well, not least likely to enroll in it. They're least likely to enroll into post-secondary education. They focus a lot on blue-collar labor, and that stuff is quickly starting to dissipate because of a myriad of issues. But the opportunities are becoming less and less.
You're not gonna make it in the 21st century. Outside of some of the more premier blue collar professionals, your plumbing, your electrical stuff. I mean, for the most part, you're not gonna make it doing that. The question is gonna become, what will Black men finally have the courage? Will black men finally have the courage? Because we had this conversation before, and I remember one of the responses was that black men are afraid of getting Me Too. This ain't about no damn Me Too. This is about goddamn black men making a sacrifice up front, but we know that most black men do not move on something unless there's some estrogen involved in the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, they pride Nipsey Hussle though.
Nipsey Hussle, look, you know, I know a lot of folks like him. It is what it is. I understand he had his whole STEM thing he was trying to do, but do you know how many brothers I know, man, got PhDs? You know, it's so hard for them to get black folks to, bring their sons out. I mean, even that article you did about a month or so ago with the brother that was the engineer that started that whole STEM camp.
Yep.
You know, I know brothers like that.
And
I have volunteered my own damn time to teach high schoolers high level biology. I don't get paid for this, but I understand if I can sit down and talk with you and put a bug in your head, that may change what you do in the future. If I can get you interested, you can see there's a pathway for you. You know, and that becomes part of that sacrifice. That sacrifice is understanding that you're laying a pathway. You're showing your children this can be done.
I was going to add too, I don't know if it's available in more of the medical fields, but I do know when I was an undergrad, my friends who were engineers, they had the opportunity to co-op. So they got to go for the school for a semester and then go work for a semester. And they were making good money when they were out. I mean, one guy I know came back to college and basically paid his rent for his apartment up front with the money he had made from co-op. So, you know, if you do look at the STEM path and you do need to see some of that work paying off from what you're doing, that's another thing is co-op, at least in the engineering side, where you can at least start to see some of that return on investment.
Well, I can specifically tell you, certainly becoming a physician is quite a bit different. You don't do that. You don't make any money until you go into residency. Even then, it's it's a far cry from what you really should be making. You know, because of the amount of work you do. PA, same thing. People don't work in PA school. PhDs, a lot of your PhDs are usually funded. They should be. If you're not, I would question that. And you should be getting a stipend as well. Now, you can get stipends from multiple sources. And I've met some PhDs out here that were very goddamn resourceful, and they were able to get cobble together quite a few stipends and make some money. You know, but again, you know, that requires a level of proactiveness. Nursing is a little different. Nursing, I can tell you, when I was in undergrad and I did my BSN, I did an 8-month internship in critical care, and so I got paid for that. You know, it was just kind of like a regular job, except I didn't work at that. I didn't work. They limited my hours, so I didn't work full time. But still got paid for it. Actually got paid a pretty decent amount. Got paid a lot more than these CNAs got paid out here. I tell you that much. And that was just at an undergrad level. Now, again, everybody I know that graduated with me, you know, they went into job. I don't think there was nobody that graduated with me that made less than 70. They got offers less than 70K.
Yeah.
Coming out.
And this is in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everybody I know. Yeah. And by the time they were like second year in, we're pushing quite a few of them were already pushing 6 figures.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it all depends. But I say that to say that, you know, there's ways to get to this, because a lot of folks you use that as a stepping stone. I have repeatedly said on previous panels that if you want to get into healthcare, I think nursing is a good place to start at, because you can always divert. You can always go off on a completely another path. You know, whether you want to do a PhD or something like that, you know, a lot of nursing schools, if you go to your major universities around this country, Big Ten, your major private universities, your nursing schools are partnering with engineering schools. And I've talked about this previously, where engineering students are taking nursing courses and nursing students are taking engineering courses. Because of the proliferation of big data, artificial intelligence, neural network building, data science, where you're seeing a convergence of all of this. And so you're seeing these partnerships popping up at college, at nursing colleges, medical schools, with pharmacy schools, and with schools of public health, and with schools of engineering. You're seeing this because all of these disciplines at some point converge. And again, like I said, it's just so hard, man. I'm in spaces and dude, you don't see brothers like that. And my question is what do black men think their place is in the 21st century? Do you not think you belong?
To hit a lick.
I guess, let me take that back, because to ask the questions to answer. No, they don't.
It's to hit a lick, man. These guys think that they don't need to go to post-secondary education. They don't need any certifications. They don't need anything to specialize in. I'll just bootleg some DVDs and sell you some incense and oils, and we'll get by just fine.
And ironically, man, those brothers I meet that do that stuff, those tend to be the ones that are the worst off physiologically. They're the ones with the worst health problems. They got gout, they got hypertension, maybe they got atrial fibrillation, some type of cardiovascular issues, impotence. I'm seeing black men in their 30s that are impotent, man.
Are they important or are they impotent?
No, because you got a lot of brothers out here in their 30s with uncontrolled diabetes, and diabetes is one of the leading causes of impotence in men.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I can imagine that.
I'm seeing brothers in their 30s that are impotent, and I'm not laughing, but it's just really sad. And again, what kind of fulfillment do you want from your life as black men? Do you not believe your place? You should be at the seat of every goddamn policy initiative. Do you know who writes a lot of your health policies, a lot of your state and local health policies? Nurses. You go look at your local and state health departments. Who are writing those policies? Many times it's nurses. But a lot, and I keep bringing this up because, like I said before, if you want to get into healthcare, I think nursing is a good place to start at. I really do. Gives you a very good gives you a very good foundation of knowledge. And I know plenty of nurses that have gone on to medical school. I know nurses that have gone on to pharmacy school. I know nurses that have gone off to PA school. I obviously know nurses that have went off, became nurse practitioners, got PhDs in XYZ discipline. It is, because it's just such a good foundation to begin with in general. You get to see one-on-one, what does a medication do to someone that's taking Coumadin, which is an anticoagulation medication. But speaking of genetics and genomics, black people tend to have more adverse reactions from Coumadin than any other group of people. And some of the research that's been coming out in the last few years have suggested that there are particular genes that black people have that make them more susceptible to having bleeding issues while they're taking Coumadin, because Coumadin is a medication that has a narrow therapeutic window, meaning that there's a very narrow range in which it has a therapeutic effect. You give too much of it, it causes too much anticoagulation. You give too little of it, it doesn't cause enough. So you have to find this Goldilocks range. But yet, this is where we're seeing where you having scientists, pharmacists that are in industry, that are in research, physicians, nurses that are looking at the nurse scientists that are looking at these issues and find out, okay, what the hell is going on here? And yet the people that are doing this research, that are writing these articles, that are being interviewed for the articles you were reading, aren't even Black. So the question becomes, what do Black men want? What do Black people want? Do you want white folks to do all the work and then think they go bring you the answers? Or you go do the work yourself? Because there's a lot of apathy among Black people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the UCC and this sort of, I'm sorry, nobody can't check me. Who gonna check you, boo? And who gonna check us, boo? And there seems to be a lot of filibustering and shucking and jiving. And it's 2020 now. The article we read the other day talked about 2030. If you don't have it together by 2030, you will be out of the market permanently. Going forward, you will be not considered even a part of the job placement.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you with pretty much certainty right now, the nursing boards are looking at the prerequisites and the requirements for the nursing profession, and they are changing that. I can tell you that with pretty much with certainty right now. These are the talks that are happening, because just the level of knowledge that you just need to have in this century is just well beyond what it ever was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Hell, your parents' generation is not even close.
I was gonna say it's already hard enough to get into nursing school as it is right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I got a friend that's a PA, and and what I'm hearing, and I'll come back to nursing in just a second. From what I'm hearing, PA schools are hard to get into than medical schools, because the competition is just that hot and heavy.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, nursing schools have always been difficult to get into. That's why most Black folks get into nursing through associate degree programs, because it's very when you're talking about going to a 4-year institution, one of these Big Ten institutions like I went to. I'm telling you that the kids you're going up against, to get into these programs, these are the offspring of doctors and lawyers and scientists. These are who their parents are.
Yep, my aunt teaches clinicals for a college back home, and she just talks about how part of it is, she says they don't even have enough nurses, like teachers who are nurses. So even if they want to have and admit more nurses, they don't even have enough people to teach. That's part of the issue. But yeah,
that's a major part of the issue. That folks are not getting the PhDs. This is why I keep telling brothers, I mean, this is a prime opportunity for you, because there's such a shortage of nurses with PhDs. We're talking about there are 3 million nurses, less than 1% of them have PhDs, have doctorates of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a major area of opportunity, just like you all talk about tech with you and Nagone, and talking about how there's at least 1 million jobs out here in tech. We're talking like the average nurse is 55 plus. Mm-hmm. Do you know what that means? By 2030, they're going to be retired.
Mm-hmm. 2030?
Yeah, they're already retiring. Many of them are retiring now.
I was going to say they'll retire and then come back to the hospital and work, like, pick up a shift every now and then.
Yeah, do some teaching. I mean, it's happening now. There's so much opportunity out here for brothers to get into healthcare, to get into biomedical research, to make a real impact, to actually get to determine the path that Black people are going to take in this damn country. There's policy written every day, and Black folks don't even have a seat at the damn table. Don't even want a damn seat at the table.
Ichisa has his hand up. Who's on, Ichisa?
Hey guys, what's up, man? I'm so upset that I missed this. I actually thought this was gonna be in the evening. God, I'm so upset. I just want to say a couple things. I want to make a point or say something to Dr. Phoenix. I was gonna call you about it and tell you. But I just want to say, I guess it's no big deal. But when you talk about college and nursing and stuff, I just want to say that every time I bring up the point when someone says the ADN route versus the BSN route, I'm not trying to like start something, because I think last time I said on the panel, Dr. Phoenix doesn't agree or whatever. It's just to push the conversation. That's all it was. It's not to be like, oh, this versus that. It's just kind of just to push the conversation. But because I know Dr. Phoenix stance on matriculating into a nursing program, how he feels about, you should go, go straight for, go for it all, and as opposed to the way others like I have done it. I I wanted to ask though, what the panel thought about, because it was talking about mental health, right? And I've seen a couple situations, and I can kind of compare it to my own. On the Onyx report, he had a guy, a professor on, and this guy was a law professor. No, he's an attorney, and he teaches. He's a college professor, but he was talking about, uh, you know, even at his age, just coming into accepting, coming to terms with black male masculinity and how he was treated in society, and especially how, how his ex-wife, I guess, um, the treatment he got for his ex-wife. And, the guy talked about being on the brink of suicide, that he was really gonna take himself out. And, I thought of that, and I thought about something that Amos Wilson had talked about a long time about, you know, how, what it is to be a man, or what it takes. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts, because, I mean, you hear this all the time where people say, you know, um, die like a man than live like a coward. I'd rather die standing up than,
Live as
live on my knees. You say what?
live as a coward.
Yeah, die than live as a coward. My thing is that, had this guy, always, and I know it's natural for self-preservation. We always, we get into situations and we want to preserve, we might have just gotten to a job or gotten to a certain arena, academia and stuff like that. And it's very hostile toward uh, black male, black manhood, black masculinity. Like you every corner you turn, you find yourself someone trying to try you. But my thing is this: I feel that, because this happened to me, to where you're gonna get fired anyway, or they're gonna get rid of you anyway. And I'm the type, I don't like burning bridges, but sometimes you just got to, I don't know, you just got to like, not, I don't know how to put it, but I don't know, be yourself, or give that person the business. Where if they're trying you, and there are ways to do it to where you can do it in a, how do I say, not so aggressive and hostile manner. You can be passive aggressive with it, but just, live by the motto: you gotta get some to give some. Because I remember hearing one. Uh, I heard a person talk about how when they were young they got teased and they would beat the person up. And then the interviewer asked, "Well, did it feel good to beat that person up?" They said, "Yeah, it felt real good." And that goes to say, like, when you're in these situations, why not just do what you're naturally inclined to do? You know what I mean? Instead of, I mean, because just listening to the guy, and when he talked about being on the brink of suicide, I think that that's a that's a real bad place to be, man. And it's like, talking about weakness and talking in a victim from the perspective of being a victim, like, I don't know. I mean, this goes to the mental health and stuff like that. But I would think it'd be better if you were to kind of like do what comes natural. I'm not talking about go upside someone's head. I'm not talking about being violent that could put yourself in jail. But you've talked about it, Mike, on panels where disrespected and attack or whatnot. Just, I don't know. I just wanted to know how you guys would feel about that.
I'll say for me, I've come to expect it. That's just for me. I always try to go into my situation expecting the worst, so I'm not caught off guard by it. And then, you know, if nothing happens, I'm more on the side of, well, you shouldn't be as cynical. But I always veer on the side of expect the worst and prepare
Yeah,
for
but do
it.
you? But I'm assuming this is Michael Coleman. Like, you know how we have this what they call.
No, that's Renaissance Man, not
Res-
Michael Coleman.
I'm sorry. Okay, it says Mike's. Oh, it's Mike's screen. Okay, Renaissance Man. Um, you know how people. I, I don't know if you remember, like coming up sometime as a young man. Sometimes you'll be in a situation where something happens, and you know you should have just gone upside this person's head, and you didn't, and you felt like a punk in the sense that it was just living in your head. There was rented space in your head. Like I said, I'm not saying to get violent, but what everybody else's natural reaction would be, we can't do it. People want to poke their finger in our eye and expect us not to holler, expect us not to scream, expect us not to complain. And I'm just like, why not? You know, they're gonna do it anyway. They're gonna get rid of you anyway. They're gonna whatever it's gonna be is gonna be. You know what I mean?
Now, I know where you're coming from, and
I
I
mean,
know what you're
proceed with
saying.
caution. Proceed
I
with
don't.
caution, but I mean, all of us can, be snarky at times. Be snarky back with them. You know, they cut you down like insult. Give don't be belligerent with them, but just give them an equal retort. I just feel that we'd be better off doing that, and it wouldn't eat you up inside. It wouldn't do all these things to you where you're pushed to the brink of wanting to kill yourself because you just can't figure out. I mean, what all this guy has accomplished, you can't figure out, why you feel empty inside. I think it's crazy.
Now, for me, I'll say the only time I've done something like that has been when I had the rules on my side, when it was clear this person was in the wrong, or like this person was lying along those lines. I've been more like forceful, straightforward in that sense. But for other snarky things, I'm just like, let it go. And for the most part, I usually find a way to get away from those type of people to begin with, because I know they're just trying to basically screw with me. I always look at it like this: if you got time to sit here and screw with me, your life must be miserable.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that you just pick and choose your battles. Is that a battle worth being fought? I don't think so. I have young Black interns, where a white male may actually come at them from a very passive aggressive way, and the Black intern says, "Yo, you need to go outside," and then they end up losing their internship, and that's the
Yeah,
whole
yeah.
purpose.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. Not don't do that. But if someone comes at you dude, we all can cut ass. Like, we all know how to, like, insult someone. So just give them that insult equally. Like, I just feel that, and I let Dr. Phoenix talk, but I guess I'll give kind of like a anecdotal standpoint from where I'm coming from. But go ahead.
No, I don't. I'm certainly not advocating for brothers just lay down and just take whatever comes at you. No, but I am. But what I'm saying is pretty much what Mike just said, which is that brothers do have to pick and choose their battles. You can't fight every goddamn battle. You really think you about to be in an environment like healthcare or in the corporate world where you probably gonna be the only nigga out there? You really think you gonna be the only person? You can't be fighting every damn battle. These
Okay.
folks would
Well,
do it would be group action on you all day. They will all gang up and say, "Well, hey, Tyrone did it. Tyrone started
okay.
it."
Okay. So let me
You
let me
can't you can't just be doing that, man. You do have to pick and choose your battle. Yeah, people say snarky stuff all the time. I get it. Even after everything I've done in my life, I still get it to this day, man. It
Okay.
is
Well,
what it is.
let me give you where I'm coming from.
I'm not gonna trip on every single little snarky comment that somebody say to me.
And not to say every little comment, but start giving some a little. And I say that to say, let me tell you where I'm coming from. Lately I've been picking up some contract work in prison health. So I've been doing like some nursing in like the jails and stuff. And I mean, just I don't know. The more aware you become, the angrier you become, or then you see all the machination, all the wheels turning, all the cogs in the wheel to how it leads to that point. I mean, I'm seeing young kids just fucking up their life behind dumb shit. You know, I'm supposed to. I'm really supposed to be objective, just giving them an assessment, see whether we take them in or send them to the hospital, stuff like that. But you see that, and you see how. I mean, you see how such the machine works. You know, it's big money in this. I mean, the county's making. I mean, they're just. I mean, people are getting books for any random little thing, right? But I'm seeing all these. You know, I see the black males there, and you know, when I see them, anytime they're under 30, it just like it does something to me. But I look at who's working there, and I've talked with Dr. Phoenix about this. Nothing but hood rats. Like these are the people that you know. This is all they hire, and to me, it's just in my mind. I was like Amos Wilson said, the dynamics haven't changed from the work environment to from the plantation to work environment. I mean, this is, you know, uh, you got the Texas Rangers walking around with their cowboy hats and their boots, and you know, but all the people in charge are these just derelict type females, and I'm just in my mind, I'm just like, I'm
And
like this
again,
this.
and then my frustration is black men's response has been to run away.
Well, not run away. I mean, but
Yeah,
what I'm saying,
yeah, it is, man.
this is
That's
the
being
plantation. It's the plantation. You
no,
got
black.
you got the master, and then you got the mammy running things.
I
And I'm
think
just
you're
like,
missing the point. My
go
point of
ahead.
what I was getting at earlier was that what do black men think their place is in the 21st century? Running away from everything? What are you gonna do? You're gonna have to make your line in the sand somewhere. You can't sit here and think, well, I'm not gonna go to college because I don't want to get me too.
Yeah.
That's coward talk.
Yeah.
People have said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the ministry, people have said things like that. You know?
Come on, man. Go to Morehouse if you're that
So I mean,
concerned.
like I said,
Coward talk. You got Morehouse, man. Do you know most of the damn students there that are in there graduating their PhD program? There is they're women. They're black females. There's more black females sitting at Morehouse doing masters and PhD than black males.
Wait, you can
Are
do
you serious? This
They had to open it up, so
Oh, it's not an all male school anymore?
it is all male.
It's all male at the undergrad.
Oh, I didn't realize it was not all male at the graduate level.
No. But how is it that you have an all male 4-year college, but then the graduate students, you would think that at least at the graduate level it would be somewhat reflective?
because they're getting fucked up in high school. They're getting fucked up at the primary and secondary school levels.
No, that's
Like,
not what's happening.
yes, they are. Yes, they are. I'm looking at that. I'm just like, they can't even read. Like it's like I'm just like, how do you go ahead?
No, that's not the entirety of what's happening. The entirety of what's happening because when I presented this before, you literally there were black men in this chat here that were saying, you know, black men aren't going to universities because they're afraid of being me too. Are you serious?
Who said that? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I mean, this is. I mean, at what point do black men believe that your place is among the damn elite, among the best? You think you're going to be a truck driver and that's going to save you in the 21st century? You think just doing the bare minimum is going to save you? No. You keep hearing these stories. Black men have the shortest lifespan. Black men are dying the earliest from hypertension. Black men are getting prostate cancer at 40 years old. Are you? I mean, black men respond better when the healthcare provider is black. I mean, again, I was invited to speak out at an event. They have an event going on where I'm at, and I was invited to speak out. But they were. Do you know how hard it was for them to find a black male physician to be with me? Do you know how hard that was?
Mhm.
Because black men are sitting here instead of, and I agree with what Jay Shine was saying earlier. Yeah, there has to be a sacrifice, but more importantly, black men have to be built for a fight.
Mhm.
That is your
Yeah,
natural. And
I'm just
I
talking about
think
having
this
that fight
idea where
in you.
we're going to run away from everything because, oh, well, there's this societal consequence. Oh, I don't want to be Me Too. Oh, I just don't want to deal with these XYZ person. I don't want to deal with these women. Then you're going to spend your entire life running.
I was going to add, even if you take that route, Mike, that kind of goes into what we were talking about yesterday with jobs being virtual. If you want to go that route, get into tech and work from home. You don't have to deal with anybody.
Well, not
Yeah.
everybody can work from home.
Yeah. Well, to an extent, but that is starting to change. You'll probably see that become more common in the next, presidential cycle, or within this presidential cycle, because office space is very expensive, and corporations don't want to pay for it. When I worked at Dell, they had many offices that were empty because people just work from home, so they closed the offices and saved some money. So, but yeah, that is true. You could, if you get into tech, but if getting people into tech is the first thing. Working from home is the second part, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't work from home unless you got a job in the industry. So, a lot of these guys, man, we had a person who came on to who was on a panel, who was a truck driver, and he was trying to tell us about artificial intelligence in trucking and the DOT and the National Highway Safety Transportation Board. And you just drive trucks, bro. You don't know anything about that. They're not consulting with you. They don't even know who you are, man.
Yeah. Nah, yeah, I was just more pointing to like, hey, if you don't want, if that's one thing you genuinely are concerned about is I don't want to deal with the BS of corporate America, that's one at least release. So you still gonna have to deal with it to some extent, but like you said, you don't have to deal with it on a daily basis.
You're not escaping. You're not escaping the BS. You're gonna deal with BS no matter where you go. That's just how it is.
But like Dr. Phoenix said, have some fight in you, in everything. I mean, it's like you don't, and you're still gonna get railroad. I'm seeing guys in bad shape. They're in prison needing help. Basic. I mean, like you got guys, young guys, 20 years old, got holes in their teeth, and they're trying to see they're like, oh, well, can I see the dentist? And I'm like, well, the dentist is really not gonna, I mean, unless you got a toothache, all they're gonna do is like, give you some, you're like, how did it get this bad?
Well, yeah, well, teeth are usually an indicator of class. And I know that, most
really? Brushing your teeth?
No,
Like, really?
I'm saying the quality of your teeth indicates the class that you usually come from. It's just it's a stereotypical indicator, but university medicine, dental schools actually do allow these.
Yeah, you can. That's true because you're right. You can, a lot of times you can go to these clinics and have dental students work on you. I mean, you got to sign a waiver, but usually it's just as good. I mean, these are
similar. I lost a tooth going to a university medicine school, so she just.
Are you serious?
When I was a kid, I had braces, and so I actually went to UIC dental school, and it was the students that worked. It was the students that put my braces that worked on me. Did all my dental work.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I mean that's absolutely correct. But more importantly, the problem is that this is an issue of whether or not black men are going to decide we belong here. This is ours. This is ours for the take.
Mm-hmm.
And that in lies what you, Mike, and Nagone and Complex were talking about in the tech space.
Mm-hmm.
All these damn jobs out here, but you got so few qualified Americans, so they just pull in all these damn H-1B visas. What do you think happens in biomedical research and for physicians, for nurses?
Mm-hmm.
They're pulling in all these H-1B visas.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago where in New Jersey now, if you got an H-1B visa, you can get tuition at these state universities. You can get free. You can get financial aid because normally you don't qualify for it if you're H-1.
Yep.
But you can get financial aid now. This is in New Jersey.
Yep.
So I mean, you know, this idea, and I'm just kind of really just, it's just so aggravating to see black men, thinking that you're gonna spend a lifetime running away for something that you helped to build.
Mm-hmm.
And by running away, they're just compounding more and more problems. I mean,
But
I mean, I saw a 20. I think he was 25. I don't know if you ever seen someone that's been indigent and homeless, like, and they've hadn't had a shower in months, just dingy and
I
literally
I
dusty. I guess
volunteer
where that's
my
the
time
term
all the
dusty
time
comes from.
doing free. I volunteer my time at least 3 times a year doing
But he was
physical, and
20.
yes,
He
I've
was
talked about this
20.
many
He
times
was
before.
25. I'm just like,
I've
yo,
talked about
like,
this
are
many
you
times before.
like,
I,
how does it get to? I mean, uh, at that you're still so young where you're elastic and you can just bounce back. All of us know that, you know, if just with some knowledge in 25, you can. I mean, as long as you don't have a bunch of babies out here and a bunch of felonies racked up, But it's like they get them so young. It's just like, what can you do? It's
Well, what you
you
can
know.
do as an advocate, EG, so you can raffle off some of those 1,000 pairs of sneakers you have
Bruh, come
as a way to raise
on,
money
seriously.
and awareness.
You're
well,
funny, man.
here's the thing. What I'm advocating for is about black men recognizing what your place is in this society.
Mhm.
And I think this conversation, and I think this goes above most black men's head,
Mhm.
because traditionally the response from black men has been, well, college ain't it, college ain't worth it. No, college is not worth it, if depending on what you do. That's very true.
Yeah.
But how do you think these folks got to where they're at, where they're writing articles?
Mhm.
They're the one. These journalists are interviewing these scientists. How the hell did you think they got there?
Mhm.
I was going to say, so much of what you're talking about starts in the home too.
Yeah.
Like when you look at what Jeffrey Canada, when he was building Harlem's Children's Zone, the thing that inspired him to build it was he'd see pretty much all his work that he did throughout the school year and the extra schooling he put in. Basically, those kids would go back home and
Forget
everything he
everything.
basically put into it basically went down the drain because the environment they came from. So a lot of what you're seeing with just dudes being in such bad shape at such young age is the households they're coming from.
Well, a lot of
The
the
reason why
research has
Nagone's
been,
not here, yeah, the reason why Nagone's not here right now because he's in the Harlem Children's Zone right now.
yeah, and black folks have been shifting this blame for the longest period of time. Most of what happens to the success of a child in in academics is, most of it comes back to the home environment.
Mhm.
If it's, I mean, the research has been pretty clear on that, in that regard.
Having books in your house, how many words you hear when your child's growing up,
Mhm.
I mean, how many hours you study, all of
reading
it.
to your kids.
Mhm.
I've talked about this before, man. I walked into white schools where you got white kids, 3rd grade, that can damn near give me a biology lesson
Mhm.
because they're learning about DNA and RNA in the 3rd grade.
Taking your
And
kids to museums.
yeah,
You know,
and
it-
we're thinking that, oh well, they're going to college. No, what they're about to run into is this brick wall of the fact that you were woefully unprepared from the birth.
Mhm.
You didn't have that foundation put into you. That's why most black folks struggle. That's why Asians and Indians excel at math, because they're 5 and 6 years old doing math.
Oh yeah.
They're very comfortable with it by the time they're 10 years old, by the time they're 12 years old. It's nothing to them.
It's actually beat into them because my coworkers and my manager from India, they we had the same conversation. They said that there was no TV and only one person in the neighborhood has a TV, and everybody goes to that house and they only can watch it for a specific amount of time, like an hour or so. But other than that, they beat their they beat their kids into that. You know, they are.
You know, it's ironic you say that because I know some cats from the diaspora. They talked about that was the same thing in their family, but even more importantly, when you look at uh what's his damn name? Oh my God, guy with Microsoft.
Oh, Bill Gates.
Yeah, Bill Gates and oh my God, what's the other guy from Apple?
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, Steve Jobs. Yeah, and there were interviews that were done with them, and Steve Jobs created the iPad. He was responsible for the iPad, where he says that he doesn't even let his kids use it. I find that ironic.
Yeah.
Oh, he said that. Wow.
Yeah.
Bill Gates said the same thing too.
Yeah.
That's
My
crazy.
coworkers are like that. They won't let their kids use technology at
Same
all.
thing too. So the things that black folks give to their children and shut them the hell up, the folks that create them wouldn't even dare give that to their own children.
Well, I know Snoop Dogg said he wouldn't let his kids listen to his music.
But he smokes right in their face though.
Yeah, but because they know what this stuff does.
Mhm.
They know what it does. You got Generation Zombie out.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was going to
People are
add too.
zombified, addicted to social media. Black folks can tell you everything about everything when they go on their damn Instagram or whatever, but they can't tell you why coronavirus is so dangerous.
Mhm.
They can't tell you the difference between a DNA virus or an RNA virus. They can't tell you that.
Mhm.
You know, and you know, but this, you know, the priorities, and then you those same habits, you carry that into adulthood, and that's why you get black students who get into 4-year institutions, and most of them fail
Mhm.
No, I was
because
going to.
it was never part of your rearing.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying, I believe it's Mike about like Asian Indian kids. I know one guy was from Washington State, one of my coworkers, and he was saying his brother moved to, I believe, either Seattle, and he was just talking about his kids could not keep up with these kids. You know, he, like I said, he grew up in Washington State, so you know, education's pretty good there. But he was saying like his kid would need a tutor at like 6 years old.
We covered an article a couple years ago on this channel, one of our first articles, man. You know, you had two young Indian male, 15 years old, talking about blockchain and genomics, and now they were going to leverage the blockchain and genomics to be a game changer on the world stage. These are 15 years old, and they were at a conference.
Yeah.
It was just nothing to them. It was just, we're going to leverage this to do this, and that. 15 years old.
Yeah, you know, it's probably even more advantageous right now to get a PhD for black men, as opposed to even, let's say, going to medical school, for example. It is probably more advantageous to do that right now because genomics is the science of the 21st century. Data science, those are the sciences of the 21st century. I mean, this is about how racism impacts healthcare. You know, I don't think I could have laid it out any better than what I have today, demonstrating how racism impacts all of your entire well-being. But more importantly, the question becomes, what will be black people's response to this? Because this is nothing new.
Yeah.
Research does one thing. It tends to confirm what people already suspect. The question becomes, what are black folks going to do about it?
That's a great place where to end this. Thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button if not already done so. Share the video if possible. Hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. Document description beneath the video for you to reference. Thank you, Dr. Phoenix, for showing up. And
thank you, as always, brother, for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Shalom, everyone.